Good afternoon. Well, welcome to the 2023 Midwest Cover Crop Council and South Dakota Soil Health Coalition meeting. I know it's kind of mouthful to get the whole meeting together, the reason we have this meeting together with two different organizations is we all know cover crops and soil go hand in hand, right? So my name is David Karki. I'm SDC Extension Agronomy Field Specialist. I'm actually based out of Watertown, South Dakota. If you don't know where it's at, it's about 100 miles straight north on I-29 from here. And I got an opportunity to join MCCC, in the middle of pandemic in 2020. I started actually in August 2020, and so I was the new person in the group. Everybody was wondering about the future meetings, and conversation came that meeting has never been held in South Dakota. So you can blame me. That's why you guys are here today. So I raised my hand, and MCC was excited about it, and I was excited too. And then the thought came that MCCC meeting usually happens in late February or early March, that kind of frame. And here in our state, Soil Health Coalition Annual Conference has been taking place in January. So how about we merge these two meetings together and become a co-host rather than hosting individual meetings? So that's why we have MCCC and Soil Health Coalition's Annual Conference this year here in Sioux Falls together or merged together. So again, welcome here, and I think you know what's on the agenda, and we had some difficulty with amphitheater 1, so we'll to amphitheater 2, which is this room. And this afternoon is mostly updates from different states and Canada provinces. And hopefully, by the end of the meeting is done in Wednesday, hopefully we can find, different new networkings, know each other well, and develop networkings, and maybe use the information that we learned or see and during this meeting in our future cover crop endeavors. Welcome again. And we're here, and we're happy to have you all here this afternoon.
Thanks, David. I'm Anna Morrow. I'm the program manager for the Midwest Cover Crops Council. And we typically start with just a quick update of the things that have been going on with the MCCC over the last year. So I know we may have a few new faces in the crowd. The clicker's not working. It's been, we've had a couple of technical issues today, so I'm not at all surprised. There we go. Okay, so the mission of the Midwest Cover Crops Council is to facilitate widespread adoption of living cover across the Midwest. We try to be a diverse group from academia, production agriculture, NGOs, commodity interests, private sector, and we have representatives from federal, state, and provincial agencies. So we're trying to advance cover crop adoption across the 12 Midwestern states and the provinces of Ontario and now Manitoba. Last year's meeting, Manitoba joined, and we're excited to have them officially here today. So this is a list of our board of directors. I want to just, I know it's a tiny screen, but just give them some props that this is a volunteer board, and all of the project updates that you're going to be hearing about today happen because of these folks, and they really drive the organization forward. And as well, we have a lot of collaborations and partnerships. So I'm sure someone's been left off this long list as well. But we try to work collaboratively so that we have a unified message of how best to adopt cover crops locally. And we think that the best way to do that is to network with our partners and all share the same message. So with that, I want to give some updates on what we've done this past year. We've moved websites. We're now at midwestcovercrops.org. So make sure any of your publications or bookmarks or anything reflect this change. We also are updating the website. So we're going to be giving it a facelift. That is under review. So you're seeing a sneak peek right now. There may be some additional changes, but we're getting a little bit of a facelift and it'll be a little more user friendly. You visit us here soon. Another one of our resources is the Pocket Field Guide. This was updated about a year ago. You can purchase it from the education store at this QR code. We'll also have some guides available at our booth at the Soil Health Conference. So if you don't have one of these, it's a great reference. You can see here 33,000 copies of the first edition were sold. The second edition received the 2015 ASA Outstanding Extension Education Materials Award. And we sold over 65,000 copies of that. And then the third edition, we have sold over 12,000 copies, and just over 8,000 of those copies were sold this year. And I messed up here. The Outstanding Extension Education Materials Award goes to the cover crop recipes. I got a little carried away with my PowerPoint here. So in previous years, we've sold 3,000 to 4,000 copies per year. And this past year, we've basically doubled that. So we sold 8,000 in the past year. So that shows me that it was time for an update. We've added several new species to the field guide. We're learning more about more species all the time. And so we've made those updates. And this revision has about 25% more content compared to the last edition. The cover crop decision tool, when we moved our website, we also moved the decision tool, and just like, you know, packing moving boxes, when you move things, sometimes things get broken or you find broken pieces. So we've been working on updating some of the decision tool. Some of the background of the tool needed some updating, so we've been doing that kind of behind the scenes. And we've also been working on maintaining the data that runs this database. So we've done revisions for Kansas and Missouri, and we are working on Nebraska and Indiana. A lot of those are still kind of in progress, but we try to maintain that database. I'd say the average is about 5 years between updates. So every 5 years, we go back and revisit that decision tool database to make sure that we are providing the best information to our clients. Our cover crop recipes, this is something we've been doing for a little while. Several of our board members, when they go to extension meetings, farmers will come up and say, okay, I'm sold on cover crops, but there's so many options, just tell me what to do. And so this is our response to those farmers who are looking to just have a low risk entry point into using cover crops. So they are specified by state and cropping system. We've got a couple of copies of, or a couple South Dakota recipes out at the registration desk. And we've got 38 total recipes available. A few of those are still being uploaded to the website. We did a lot of work over the last year, and I'm still catching up on getting some of those things loaded. And you can find those under Getting Started with the cover crop recipe tab. Crop advisor modules, these were designed to be kind of ready to go presentations. So if you go to our website, you can find recorded webinars of these PowerPoint presentations, and then you can download the PowerPoint, put your organization's name on there, and take that to a meeting to present on a series of 11 different topics. So we've got everything from soil health to establishment, pests, economics, and so on. The seeding rate calculator, I did a quick update on this last year. We're still working on this. The goal is for this to be a straightforward seeding rate calculator for complex mixes. So we recognize that the decision tool does a good job of providing information about a single species, and this will kind of be the step 2 for creating a mix. We will have default seeding rates that populate for less experienced growers, and then you can customize those seeding rates however you would like. Just like our decision tool, it's intended to be a learning tool. And then we're working in partnership with the NRCS so that further down the line, we can use this tool to help evaluate for cost share. And like I said, that we're still reviewing a draft version of this. So a sneak peek of the phone version, mobile version, will show you that we will provide total pounds of bulk seed, the mix of the cost of the mix per acre, and the price will be a user input. Pounds of seed per acre compared to plants per acre, so you can get a feel for what this mix will look like when you seed it in the field. And then you can take that particular mix that you've developed to NRCS or your crop advisor to NRCS and be interchangeable that way. So those are some of the things that we have been working on in the past. They're not really new projects, but over the past year, we've done a few new things as well. We worked with Michigan State Extension to develop 8 cover crop videos. They're really short little snippets about cover crop topics. So you can go to YouTube and check those out. And we've also worked with Ohio State Extension to develop some species fact sheets. So there are 23 of those, and they will be coming out soon. We're also trying to spread the word about Midwest Cover Crops Council. We realize we're a pretty well-kept secret. And so we're trying to go to more larger meetings and connect with more of our partners. So if you happen to be going to the Commodity Classic or the National Association of Conservation District meeting, please look us up. Any of our members that are going to the Commodity Classic, we could probably use some help with that. So look me up if you're interested in helping out with that. I want to give a quick update. Tomorrow we have 3 breakout sessions, and those are just working groups. To where we're kind of kicking off a few projects and we'd like to get some input from everyone. So the first is the cover crop analyzer tool. I won't go into depth on this. It's working for Illinois and we have built it out for Indiana, but the data still needs to be verified. So it is going to predict cereal rye cover crop biomass, C to N ratio, nitrogen uptake, and nitrogen loss reduction. And that's based on growing degree days. So if you'd like to learn more about this tool and then maybe work on, who's the next state to get this tool developed for them, we'll have a working session for those folks tomorrow, and I'll let them cover the details. The second working session tomorrow will be an industry needs assessment. So we realize that crop advisors have different risks when they recommend practices to growers compared to the farmers themselves. So they, when they approach a client looking to recommend conservation practices, they have the risk of losing that client if the weather doesn't cooperate or things like that. And so we recognize that they have different needs. And we would like to better understand what those are and how MCCC can help support them in providing good cover crop information to their clients. And so we're just starting that project, and we'll kind of start with a discussion of what that will look like tomorrow in the working session. We're also starting a new collaboration with NRCS. And we will be working on a cover crop curriculum with professionals. So we are envisioning a 1-day hands-on training, kind of like a train the trainer for NRCS staff, extension, soil and water districts, those types of folks, and industry. And we're developing a curriculum that will be regionally applicable, but available to be, tailored to your specific needs within your, local state. So we're just getting started with that, and we would like your input there as well. So those are the 3 working sessions that are outlined for tomorrow. You can pick your favorite and join us and provide us with some good input. I also want you to mark your calendar. Next year we'll be in Indianapolis, February 13th and 14th at the Crown Plaza Indianapolis Airport Hotel. I think there's some save the dates out on the registration table. And if you're on the listserv, which you can join by going to our website and the main menu way across on the right end, you can subscribe. I will be bugging you about that as soon as you get home from this meeting. So that should be on your calendar. If you're on Facebook or Twitter, look us up. And with that, I would like to also recognize that this year we're doing a separate graduate student session. And so we wanted to have those students here to hear about MCCC updates. And then they will be doing some networking and talking with some cover crop professionals and planning for next year. So we're excited to be expanding our opportunities for graduate students. And I am going to turn this over to David for state reports, and I will take the graduate students to their conference room number 3, which this is such a maze of a conference place that I'm going to take them there. David, I'll go ahead and pull your slides up.
Thank you, Anna. So I'm here first again in the order of state reports. So I'll go through a bunch of highlights of various projects that have been completed or in progress in South Dakota that's related to cover crops. So this won't be a very descriptive, it's more like a snapshot of different projects that I can, that I got, different PIs are involved, different project leaders are involved, and I got their input to make these slides. There we go. The first one is corn yield and soil nutrient response to different cover crops and water availability. And that's from the experiment that we did from 2018 to 2021. So this is more or less, 4 years of data there. And there are several objectives in this project. Of course, the nutrient availability, EONR for corn, soil health parameters, grain moisture status, and of course, and at the end, which I have in the bold later, grain yield of subsequent crops. So, so basically, what we're trying to look at is what happens to the subsequent crop if we have, especially in corn, if you have cover crops in the previous fall. So all the study sites were on-farm, farmer cooperative field, and also we had one SDSU research station. And some of the measurements that we took are in this is soil organic matter, organic carbon, total N, Olsen P, and extractable K. And those are all taken from top 6 inches of soil, and of course the nitrate and sulfate further down below in the soil profile. And all the weather data we pulled is from Prism Climate Group. So if you look at this table here, there are two things that I would like to kind of have your attention at is that nitrate N and nitrate N from both soil depth were significantly different, but other things that we measured didn't come out to be significantly different. And you can see that in the p-value in the right column between no cover crop and cover crop treatments. So this is a little more alarming. If you look at it, all the non-significant and significant column in all the years that we took data, especially for corn yield, you can look at it. If you have non-significant, you have the lower numbers, positive or negative, but the significant ones are mostly negative, which trying to tell us that cover crops did have negative impact on corn yield. Okay. And then we tried to line that up with the data we had. When you look at it on the horizontal axis, inches of precip during the corn year, and on the vertical axis, you have the yield difference. That means if it's 0, the yield isn't different than the control. But if you had up or down, then you had the yield difference compared to the control in that trial. And further you move on your right, as the precipitation goes up, you see that dots going up or having a as equal to the control or better yield that way. So had a precipitation effect on corn yield rather than probably having just the cover crop effects. And if you put that in a different way, so you have inches of precipitation on the horizontal axis on the bottom, and then yield difference again. So we're looking at it as 22, 23 inches of, annual precipitation. And then if you go above that, we'll have better results in grain yield of corn. And if you look at that in the August to August, that means the previous year of August to all the way into the August of the corn growing year, then we're looking at that amount of rainfall or amount of precipitation up to about 30 plus. So here's the historic weather data for South Dakota. We are probably somewhere in the. So if you're in the southeast corner, which receives the most rainfall, annual precipitation above 26 inches a year, and further you move west, the rainfall amount goes down. So what does that mean? And also we did incorporate SPEI or standardized evapotranspiration index, added evapotranspiration data, historic ET data on different sites, and that kind of helped explain some of the things too. And this project did have other aspects to it, but I can't go all the details of it. But I'm going to leave this at this last slide, and kind of leave with a question mark. Should we consider cover crops before corn? And if we do, what are the other variables than what we just mentioned? Maybe there are more other variables we need to know about, before we make that decision. But within the same project, we had soybean also, and soybean didn't have any effects in yield, just happened because of the cover crops prior to the soybean growing year. Then there is another. This is different. Different experiment done at the Southeast Research Farm, which is about 30 miles south from here, pretty straightforward, 30 miles south, comparing broadleaf based cover crops and grass cover crop blends versus the control, across different years and different trials. Their highlighted rows are, we consider the kind of drought year. 2012, we had a drought year, and then 21 and 2022 were also drought year, or very less rainfall that we received in this particular site, actually across the state. And you look at the averages on the bottom, broadleaf does tend to have a positive effect than just having grass cover crops. if you average all across the seasons. And at the same experiment, research station, and we did another trial again. The 2022 was drought year. If you look at it, you have controlled radish, grazing blend, and the red clover and rye, and then you have this corn yield on the very right column. Having rye as a cover crop before corn is probably a no deal. Just looking at this, data from 2022, and the cover crop was after oats in 2021. Extreme drought, and grazing blend was a grass legume brassica mixture. And red clover was stunted but not killed by glyphosate, in the process. At the Southeast farm, one thing we always try to keep, up to date was the long-term rotation, portion of the field, because sometimes it's hard to get that long-term data. And this portion of the farm has been in rotation plot, we call them, since early 1990s, and we have 2-year rotation, 3-year and 4-year rotation over the years. And since 2013, we had cover crop, always a control, and cover crop in each of these rotation plots. And you can look at it, if you look at the yield of 2022, again, it was a drought year. If you look at the yield, the further out the rotation, you have better yield than having just the 2-way rotation with corn and beans. And corn and beans had rye as a cover crop, whereas the other rotations had other blends, because it had small grain rotation and allowed to have other various different cover crop blends. And this particular slide is from our ARS partner, Shannon Osborne, our colleague. ARS also does cover crop research, and she sent me a couple of slides to show nitrogen mineralization in corn year and how the mineralization differs for different cover crop treatments in the previous fall. And you can see, there's a control, no cover crop, rye cover crop, sweet clover, and vetch. If you look at the graph on your left, the different time periods in a corn growing season that these mineralization data were measured. And V6 and up to R3 is more likely the actively growing for corn, and it had the better mineralization with sweet clover and vetch. And if you plot that relationship with the yield, it did have about R square of 82, 0.82. If you plot that with the mineralization during that period of V6 to R3. So it does show it's a good predictor of corn yield if you have a better look at the mineralization data from that growth period of corn. And quick summary, I should say. Legume cover crop resulted in higher in-season and mineralization, and mineralization during V6 to R3 was the best predictor of yield. And fall seeded legume cover crops improved corn yield under limited conditions. These are the few summary of the paper or the project they had, and it's probably also published in already. This paper is already published. So next project that I received is from Dr. Jason Clark's team, and similar experiments looking at different cover crops and how the but they did have a different nitrogen rate as treatment in the corn growing year. But I'm going to summarize what's in the left-hand corner there. When we started, it seems logical that corn would do better after the broadleaf mixed cover crop, but this shows that grass, corn following grass cover crop is doing better. And Jason is here in the room, so you can always talk to him during the break too if you have any questions on this. But for soybeans, there is no difference, having an interseeded cover crops, in-season interseeded cover crops. But in corn, you had differences in different cover crop treatments. The corn yields were different. And so next one is from Chris Graham. He's out west, out in the West River Research and Extension Center. And these had the component of livestock and cover crops. So what happens to wheat in the following year if you have full season cover crops grown in the previous year? The control had sorghum Sudan hay. There were in two cover crop mixes. One was cover crop grazed, standing cover crops were grazed, and the other one had the swath grazing. And in the past 2 years, about 6 bushel increase in wheat yield following swath grazed cover crops. And at this point, we don't know exactly why, or we haven't really quantified yet. And so I'm going to, this one is a little moving gear from cropping systems. This is more in a vegetable production system. Christine Lang, our extension horticulturist, is doing this experiment. I think this is her first year. There are 4 objectives, and objective 1 is to look at different perennial clovers as cover and living mulch for solanaceous, brassica, and other cucurbit crops, vegetable crops, and the effects of cover crops on those vegetable crops. And the objective 2, 3, and 4 does have a strong extension and outreach component to this project. And her group is partnering with Cedar Creek Gardens, Peggy Martin and Bud Mankey out west, western part of the state, as a part of the project also. This is the preliminary finding from this project. I think it's a biomass in the plant height, and you have a bare ground, of course, in red, white, and white times Kura clovers. And you can see in all the letters on the side of the numbers would be more of a statistical difference. If you have the same numbers in a column, those are not statistically different, but if you have different letters, then it would be statistically different. And there are more descriptive analysis, summary of the project will be produced and published on our website on our Southeast Research Farms, annual progress report and extension website for the Brookings site. And I'm just going to list down some projects because I don't have any highlight or summary to show. But I know Dr. David Clay and Sudi Zhu, both of their programs have been heavily involved in cover crop research. And there are some published papers already. I've listed the DOIs of that. And that's why I only have the listing of these, but I think Anna will put together all of these state reports and the website. So when we're doing that process, maybe I can find some of the description a little more explanatory than just having these highlights or bullet points. And here you see, I would like to again thank South Dakota Solar Coalition. So the South Dakota Solar Coalition comes here again. I think last year in our state report, I mentioned different herbicide effects on cover crops following that particular cash crop. But we repeated that experiment for demonstration during soil health school in August this year. And I think it's critical to kind of show and learn from the large projects and have that in the demonstration and let our folks, producers and stakeholders know what the results would be. And Austin Carlson and Anthony Bly did that during the soil health school. And the school had about 40 registered students for the school, but also after the regular school is done, then we were able to bring in a freshman from Ag System class in SDSU to come out and look at this particular project and also the other on-field demonstration that related to cropping systems and cover crops and soil health, of course. And that's the result, a chart of effects of different, all of those herbicides that's used in wheat, how they affected, cover crops following different cover crop individual species following the, wheat harvest. And I pulled this from Solar Coalition's website. You can always go there and look at look at it in a better picture too. And that's all I have. So here's my contact information. You can always contact me, or if you have, if you've seen some familiar names as a PI on all of those projects, you can directly reach out to them also. Yeah, thank you.
All right, I've got my timer on. I'm Eileen Kladivko from Purdue University, and I'm going to present just a little bit about what's going on in Indiana related to cover crops and soil health. So I'm at Purdue University, where we do research and extension, and I'll do talk a little bit about some of the projects going on there. We have a group called the Conservation Cropping Systems Initiative, or CCSI, which is very active in outreach and extension education. And I'll talk a little bit about our programs. That's a program of our Indiana Conservation Partnership, which involves many state agencies and entities along with Purdue. USDA NRCS is very active with soil health and cover crops throughout our state. So I'll talk a little bit about that. Indiana State Department of Agriculture, the county soil and water conservation districts, the Nature Conservancy, Indiana Soy and Corn, commodity groups and ag industry. My point is just that the work that's going on in cover crops and soil health is broad-based in Indiana. And we do this in concert, in partnership with different groups. And that's part of our strength, I think, in Indiana. So what's the magic thing we have decided that works for this? Not the down doesn't, that doesn't. Down doesn't, so that doesn't, the enter doesn't. How about the mouse? The mouse doesn't. All right, thank you. It's not advanced on this computer, but okay. So it's advanced on the screen. That's all that really matters. So Dr. Shalimar Armstrong and Dr. Dan Quinn are two of the newer faculty at Purdue who are doing a lot of work with cover crops, and I'll be showing you some of Shalimar's work. Dr. Bill Johnson in weed science does work on weed suppression and termination timing, and his graduate student Lucas did make it, so see his poster later today. Myself, I still have some cover crop work on some long-term cover crop project related to soil properties and nitrate uptake. Keith Johnson works on forages and cover crops and using covers as forages for grazing primarily. Stephen Myers, a relatively new professor in the horticulture department, works on weed management using cover crops as well in specialty crops. We have a couple of new faculty in agronomy that may or may not do very much with cover crops, but I wanted to at least introduce their names because they're certainly going to be working on things related to soil health. And that is Dr. Roland Wilhelm, who works on the soil microbiome, and Dr. Ichao Rui, who's in agroecology. So that's just kind of a snippet of some of the folks that are working in soil health and cover crops. All right, I have a series of 6 slides from Shalimar Armstrong. So I may or may not get all the points totally correct, but I will do my best given when I received them from him. So there's really 3 projects that he's got highlighted for today. One of them is the precision winter cereal rye cover cropping for improving both profitability and environmental stewardship. So he's doing that along with colleagues at Southern Illinois University and at University of Illinois. It's being done in Indiana and Illinois, looking at precision planting. So planting only not in the corn row, okay, everywhere else. And I think on that one, they are also looking at the nitrate leaching, although I'm not absolutely sure on this one, but many of the projects that he works on with those two guys involve nitrate leaching. One of his projects is a tile drain study at Illinois State University, where they are looking at that water quality impact. Okay, the second project that he wanted to highlight for you folks, and I think there'll be a lot of interest in this, is the one with Balanza clover. And so he and Dan Quinn, who's our new corn extension person at Purdue, are working on this. And so they're basically looking at Balanza clover and cereal rye, and they're planting it conventionally, so over the whole field, versus precision planting. And the precision planting he has illustrated here, where basically they're not planting in the skipped corn row. It's very difficult to use that. So I'm going to use my finger. Corn row is skipped, and we've got the cover crop planted and skipping essentially the where the corn row will be. Okay, so basically you can see that very nicely in that photograph. They're doing that with both the cereal rye and the clover. And then they have different nitrogen rates. So essentially they're doing a nitrogen replacement curve. The cover crops were planted on September 11th in 21 and terminated in spring of 22. The cereal rye, please note the termination times are different. Cereal rye was terminated when we would recommend you terminate it, which is pretty small. So it was April 6th. The Balanza clover, because they wanted to get more nitrogen from the Balanza clover, was terminated on May 20th. Okay, so keep that in mind as I go to some of the results. Well, that's interesting. All right, we still seem to be having some technical issues. I would welcome some help here. Oh, there, that's that is. Okay, thank you. All right, so here we've got a bar graph on cover crop performance from last year. The left graph here is looking at the biomass. You can't read the scale, I'm sure, from where you're sitting, but we've got biomass in kilograms per hectare on the vertical axis. The first two set of bars are the precision planting. The right-hand two set of bars are the conventional planting. So black is the Balanza clover, green is the cereal rye. So in both cases, the black bar is greater than the green bar. Okay, so we have more biomass from the Balanza clover than we do from the cereal rye. Also, do remember that the termination dates were quite different, right? He let the Balanza clover grow a lot longer. The difference between the Balanza clover, he did actually get the black bar on the left is greater than the black bar on the right. So he got more growth with the precision planting of Balanza. For the cereal rye, the light green, they look pretty even, but if there was anything that was greater, it would be the conventional. Okay, so different biomass for precision versus conventional, and much more biomass for the Balanza than for the cereal rye. He's got a little statistical star there. I don't actually know which one that is relating to, but probably for the growth of the Balanza versus the cereal rye. The right-hand series graph is the nitrogen uptake. So it's termed as uptake. So for the cereal rye, it would be uptake from the soil. For the Balanza clover, it would be mostly fixed by the Balanza, but it's just basically the nitrogen in the above ground biomass. Obviously, much more nitrogen in the Balanza clover than in the cereal rye, whether it's precision planted or conventionally planted. And again, the nitrogen is going to go along with the biomass, right? So for the Balanza, we had less growth in conventional and precision, so we had less nitrogen. For the rye, they were pretty similar, but if anything, there was a little more nitrogen in the conventional full. And he has calculated the C to N ratios there, and this doesn't work on that either, okay? So the C to N ratio for the Balanza clover is 13, the C to N ratio for the cereal rye is 18. Neither one of those would be considered problematic for immobilizing nitrogen, but certainly it may affect the rate at which that will then be decomposed and released, although they're not going to tie it up. Okay, he had different nitrogen rates, as we said, for all of those treatments. And so here he's got this plotted as corn yield versus nitrogen rate. And you can see that at the lower levels of at the lower fertilizer nitrogen rates, of course, there's a big difference between the clover and the cereal rye. At the higher rates, there's not so much difference, okay? And in fact, if I look at that, that's basically saying that the yields, once you put on a nitrogen for the rye, were not hurt, but certainly the Balanza clover was providing a huge amount of nitrogen at the lower nitrogen rates. He's got indicated there the maximum return to nitrogen. The first arrow is for the Balanza clover. The second arrow is for no cover and the precision cereal rye, and the third for the conventional cereal rye. Another project that I think he's finished up now, at least one of the PhD students has graduated on this one, was looking at the impact of long-term cover crop management on dissolved reactive phosphorus loss. This is a farmer in East Central Indiana who had cover crop treatments for a number of years, and then they went in and sampled some of the soil in order to look at the phosphorus release from these different treatments. So that was a control, cereal rye, radish oats, and annual ryegrass, and to look at the effect of those treatments on phosphorus absorption. So in this graph here on the left is the 0 to 2 centimeters, so really, really close to the surface. And you can see that the control and the oats radish had higher amount, the vertical axis here is the amount of phosphorus that was released after a 1 hour extraction, looking at phosphorus availability. And the cereal rye and annual ryegrass were lower at the 2 to 4 centimeter depth. So again, not very deep, there was no significant difference. So basically the oats radish are releasing that phosphorus because the radish decomposes quite quickly, much more so than the other cover crops. All right, something I know a little bit more about is my own project. So an update on a project that some of you are aware of. It's part of the Sustainable Corn Project that went from 2011 to 2016. We've continued to grow cover crops. On that, it's a corn soybean rotation starting in 2011 with cereal rye cover crop, simple cereal rye cover crop grown after both corn and after soybeans. We use starter nitrogen plus side dress nitrogen based on experiences in Indiana. Starter nitrogen can often overcome any problem that you have with cereal rye, not always, but often. Been quite successful. We do let the rye grow longer before the soybeans because we know that the soybeans can handle it, and we're trying to build soil organic matter. In 2016, we did split those plots once the Sustainable Corn Project was over, and we have just 2 nitrogen rates. That's all we have room for on that project. So we have a regular nitrogen rate and a -50. Still no effective cover crop for corn or beans, positive or negative. The positive thing is we've never had a problem with corn yields on that project for 12 years with cereal rye. The negative is with soybeans, we were hoping that we would have a yield improvement, and we haven't had that either. But basically, we've had no effect of the cereal rye, positive or negative, on either the corn or the soybeans. So. All right, a couple more slides, extension, education and training. We're really increasing our capacity in Indiana with technical expertise on soil health for outreach work, which we're really thrilled about. Joe Rorick, who many of you know, used to be with CCSI. He's now joint with Indiana Corn and Soy and Purdue Extension. We have another CCSI agronomist, Hans Schmitz, who used to be a county educator and is now doing trainings related to soil health. And we are actually searching for a second agronomist. So we're actually increasing capacity. Our audiences include farmers as well as agency folks and new extension staff and new NRCS staff. Most of this is done, as I said, in concert with Purdue, NRCS, CCSI, and soil and water conservation districts. We're also increasing capacity of program managers, who are the people who help actually put together a whole bunch of these events all over the state. And thanks to Indiana NRCS for helping fund and helping us increase this capacity. That's been huge. Our core curriculum, the current version is that we have now, after COVID, of course, we have a mix of virtual as well as in person. We have an intro to soils program, which is for those people who have never studied anything related to soils, to get them a little bit of knowledge. We have a core conservation cropping systems, which is soil health, cover crops. It's 3 virtual sessions and 1 in-person session, cover crop ID and so on. How do you assess soil health in the field? We have a 3-day intensive soil health training, which is aimed at new NRCS staff, but we also have many of our other partnership staff who take that. And then advanced topics that change year by year. Also a little bit of training on communications and how do we sell conservation more effectively. So getting into a little of the communication and the social science. The last thing I want to talk about is, if you have not checked this out, I encourage you to do so. The CCSI website has the group project that would have come out on the MCCC listserv a couple of times. But you can also see banners that will be displayed at the Soil Health Coalition meeting starting tomorrow, I think. But these are available. I've got 3 of these slides here. They were redrafted from the original diagrams done by digging pits in Waggoner back in the last century and hand drawing roots. Okay, they're completely scalable, so you can scale them. Yes, all this verbiage is there, and that's verbiage that's there to prevent people from selling these, because that would go against the license that we have. But it's a tremendous thing for helping with our educational outreach, to show what some of these different root structures look like. Here you can see the daikon radish, which has actually got not nearly so much near the top, but a deep taproot, and hairy vetch. And with that, I will end. Without technical difficulties, it would have been on time, but with technical difficulties, it's not. Come in again next year.
The theme of the day.
Hi, everybody. I'm Anna Cates, the Extension Soil Health Specialist for Minnesota. I'm not going to cover a whole bunch of different projects today. I didn't get that many responses to my call for updates, which some of you can probably relate to. But I wanted to just talk high level about what's going on in Minnesota, a couple things I'm interested in. And then one thing we're really trying to figure out in Minnesota is planting green and how it works and whether it can work. And so I invited Eric Yu to talk about his PhD research on that topic. So we'll do kind of a deep dive there. I put up one of these drought monitor maps, and then I put up a few of them because that really has affected how cover crops are playing out in Minnesota the last couple of years. We've had dry falls where people are nervous to plant anything. Sometimes it works out, sometimes it more than works out. I had a farmer who was, nervous to put something in fall of 2021, and then by spring of 2022, he could never get in to terminate it. It got much bigger than would have appreciated. So there's just been a lot of weather challenges for us, and that's changed how cover crops are kind of going in and out across the landscape. We do have a lot of support from our state partners. We have a representative from the Board of Water and Soil Resources in the back. Jill Sackett-Eberhard is here. And then our Minnesota NRCS State Soil Health Specialist is here too. So we have a lot of good state funding and cost share programs, and cover crop adoption, I think, is still increasing, but it's been challenging for a couple of years. Okay, one thing I'm really interested in is quantifying some things we assume about cover crops, like their ability to slow down erosion. So I'm using these little mats on the ground to watch the soil blow or wash over them. And we've had some success with actually showing an effect of how much soil is moving in the field. You can't say whether it's leaving or not, but you can say that soil is or is not moving. It's super cheap. It's just a little piece of fabric that's pinned to the ground for some number of weeks or months. And the data does seem to kind of tell the story we expect, where we see more soil moving with cover crops than without. These ones were out for about a month in the spring of 2022. Another one of my students is measuring erosion, wind blown sediment, and you can go see his poster. That's Mehmet Öztürk. Those are cover crop and no cover crop fields also. Okay, so the planting green piece, we finally have a couple of different research projects going. You know, it's really important for us because we definitely get a lot more biomass when we let things grow a little bit longer. You know, this shows kind of a typical range of biomass in Minnesota, I would say, from under 500 up to maybe over 1,200-1,300 if you're lucky. So we really need those extra few weeks to get an amount of biomass that's going to have an appreciable effect on soil properties, I would say. This is just more data showing the delay in termination really changes how much ground cover and biomass you get. However, there can be a yield issue. And so this, a lot of people today have been talking about the corn yield with cereal rye conflicts. And that's definitely something we're looking at. Although most of our research right now, because of that scary issue, is looking at planting green soybeans. And so we're focusing on what we think is a less scary option for farmers. Again, so here's the corn yield going down as you delay termination, soybean yield staying really steady. Wish you guys didn't have to see this from me. How's that? And then the other factor with that is moisture. So this is showing that when you have when we had a tillage termination of cover crop, that probably used up a little more moisture, and in one of the dry years we've had recently, that probably had an effect on the corn yield overall. And I was really appreciating your figures looking at precip because it's a bunch of reasons why rye could slow down your corn crop. And I love that precip figure as a potential explanatory variable. So I'm involved in these on-farm trials we have going on all up and down western Minnesota. The ones up north are looking at cover crops, following wheat, going into soybeans. And then in the central part of Minnesota, we've got following corn silage, planting cereal rye, and looking at terminating either before planting, at planting, or afterwards. Our first soybean year was 2022, and we did see lower soybean stand and less yield at many of our sites. However, this was an unusual year, like I said, for growing a lot of cover crops. And these pictures show how much cereal rye we got at some of our sites. I think this furthest right picture was something like 4,000 pounds per acre of biomass, which is very unusual in Minnesota. So obviously that was no one's goal. We had such wet conditions that it was hard to get it to germinate. No one was intending to grow 4,000 pounds of biomass, and we don't recommend it. I'm going to let you talk about your research now, Eric. Hopefully I didn't take up too much time.
My name's Karki. I'm a PhD student at the University of Minnesota, working primarily in weed science, but today I'll be presenting some of my work involving cover crops. So the first study looked at evaluating chemical and non-chemical options for cereal rye cover crop termination. And this is just a treatment list here. And so we have two mechanical options here. So we have, it's not showing up. We have two mechanical options here. We have mow killing and disking or plowing, and we have 12 herbicide options. So we already know that glyphosate or Roundup is already a really effective way of terminating cereal rye. But what if there's constraints or concerns due to the rising costs of glyphosate, or just the incidences of glyphosate resistant weeds becoming more prevalent? We would want to see what are the other options. So we have 12 different herbicide options, including glyphosate. So we are testing glyphosate, and we're also testing other herbicides and mixing that with the glyphosate. Other herbicides that we're looking at is glufosinate, so that's our Liberty, clethodim, tiofenicil, and paraquat. And we're also looking at paraquat tank mix with 240. So we had 2 different locations that we conducted this study, including Rosemount, Minnesota and Lamberton, Minnesota, which are marked on this map. And we also applied those treatments at 2 different timings. So once at the tillering stage of the cereal rye, and the second was the heading stage of the cereal rye. This here's looking at the figures. We have cereal rye control as a percentage along the y-axis, and that's separated by the 2 different application timings. So at the tillering stage at the top, and then the heading stage at the bottom. And there was no significant difference between the 2 locations, so we did combine all the data, and the observations here were made 21 days after treatment. So a few things to note from these figures is our glyphosate, any treatment that included glyphosate pretty much had complete control. So there was no antagonistic effects between the herbicides that we selected to mix with the glyphosate. The next best option was our paraquat options. But the concern with paraquat obviously is there's concerns with effects on human health, and it is a contact herbicide. So complete spray coverage is pretty important here. And the next best option was clethodim. So clethodim is clethodim is right here. And so clethodim, that's going to be highly stage dependent. So it was much more efficacious when applied earlier rather than late. And so for our mechanical options, it did appear that it was better to apply those applications in the later stages here. So this slide just summarizes what I talked about in the previous slide. So we do plan to continue this and repeat the study this year. This time we are planning on adding another mechanical option. We are going to be evaluating roller crimping. And then the next study that I want to quickly go through is the impact of cereal rye cover crop seeding rate and termination timing on weed management in soybean in Minnesota. So this is conducted in response to the lack of sufficient data to advise growers on what that optimal seeding rate and termination timing is for cereal biomass and its effect on weed control and soybean yield in Minnesota. And again, we had 2 locations here that we conducted the study, including Lamberton, Minnesota at a research station and Rochester, Minnesota on a family farm. And this is just a treatment list. So we had 4 seeding rates, including 0, 67, 101, and 134 kilograms per hectare, or 0, 60, 90, and 120 pounds per acre. And we had 4 different termination timing treatments, including 7 days prior to cash crop planting, which I'll be referring to as T1, at cash crop planting, or T2, at cash crop planting with a pre-emergent herbicide applied, or T2 plus pre, and finally our 7 days after cash crop planting, or T3. So this is our planting green treatment, and we also had 2 different cash crop planting dates. We had an early and a late cash crop planting date, and finally we had 2 systems that we looked at, including a continuous corn system and a corn followed by a soybean rotation. So today for the results, I'm just going to be presenting results from the corn followed by soybean rotation. The data were subjected to an ANOVA and using a general linear mixed model package in R. And so here we can see that cereal rye biomass was significantly affected by soybean planting date and termination timing, which are bolded on the table here. But it was not affected by cereal rye seeding rate. So this is pretty consistent with other data that have been reported in other parts of the country. This figure here just shows cereal rye biomass. Along the y-axis, we have that in kilograms per hectare on the left side, and on the right side, we have it in pounds per acre. Along the y-axis, we have the termination timing, and that's split into the 2 different planting dates, with Lamberton on the left side and Rochester on the right side. And we can see that as we delay termination timing, that cereal rye biomass production does increase. All right, moving into the weed control and the soybean yield data. I'll only be presenting 1 location, Rochester, Minnesota. And so this location, the predominant grassy weed species was yellow foxtail. And we can see that in this graph here, or this figure here, we have control on the y-axis as a percentage, and then along the x-axis, we have the termination timings separated by the two different planting dates. So control was greatest in that late planting, especially at that at planting and beyond. And then although it wasn't as great control in the early planting, we do see that T2 plus pre and that T3 treatment in the early planting was still pretty good at 80%. And then the predominant weed species here for broadleaves was common lamb's quarters. And we see a similar trend here. So in that late planting, we're seeing really good control with little less control for that T3 in the early planting, but still over 80%. So pretty decent still. And then moving on to soybean yield. So there were 3 different significant interactions here. So the first significant interaction was cereal rise seeding rate and termination timing. So this graph here just shows the termination timing along the x-axis, and within each of those timings, we have the different seeding rates, and that's ascending from 0 to 134 kilograms per hectare. And it's pretty similar all the way across. So with the exception to this one right here, so this is 0 kilograms per hectare 7 days prior to cash-crop planting, and then this is 134 kilograms per hectare terminated 7 days after planting. So on that far end, we can see that weeds are really taking over and making an impact on the soybean yield. Whereas here, we're just getting way too much biomass from the cereal rye, which is acting as a weed. So that's impacting the soybean yield. And then the next significant interaction was between soybean planting date and cereal rye seeding rate. So we have cereal rye seeding rate on the bottom, and within each of those rates, we have the 2 planting dates. The early planting date is in green and the late planting date is in orange. And here we can see that early planting date is having significantly higher soybean yield. And looking at the next significant interaction, we have soybean planting date and termination timing. And on the x-axis, we have termination timing. And again, within each of those timings, we have the different planting dates. So again, we see a similar trend here where early soybean planting is providing more yield. All right, so the take-home message here, in Minnesota, I would suggest that seeding rye at 67 kilograms per hectare, just because there isn't a significant difference between the seeding rates on its impact on the seeding rate, or sorry, the biomass production. So we would be lowering our input costs here, and then terminating that cereal rye 7 days after planting an earlier soybean planting date. And that's because although we were getting better weed control in that late planting date, we were getting a negative hit on the soybean yield. And this all provided similar weed control and yield as the no cereal rye cover crop plus pre-treatment. So this is what we would expect the typical grower to utilize, is that applying that pre-treatment with no cover crops at planting. So this would suggest that growers in Minnesota should be able to plant their cover crops without having that negative impact on soybean yield. So our next steps are to continue and repeat the study. We are looking at a corn system. We do want to do an economic analysis as well on all the different treatment combinations and report what would be the most profitable. That's all I got. Also, there's a poster on all this if you guys want to drop by.
Okay, hi everybody. I'm Dean Baas, retired associate of educator with Michigan State University Extension. All the rest of the team from I like to walk around. All the rest of the team from Michigan had other commitments because it's a really busy time, so they called me out of retirement. I'm not sure that was a good idea, but we're gonna go with it. So this is what it would. Here we go. Okay. So just a quick update on the cover crop team at MSU. A lot of you know these people not only through the Midwest Cover Crop Council, but through the Soil Health Nexus. And they're located around the state, and we have some people on campus specialists. The primary contacts, Monica is the board member, Midwest Cover Crop Council, Monica Jean, and Kim Casta is our campus specialist who works with cover crops. Yes. So just a couple of other updates. Like I said, I retired last year, but I am continuing to serve on the Council Executive Committee, so you can't get rid of me too easily. And just so you know, Paul Gross, a lot of you know him also from Soil Health Nexus. He will be retiring March 1 this year, but we're also hiring some new people, so hopefully there'll be some new people in the future. Quick summary on what's in our state report. We've got 21 ongoing research projects at MSU. There were 5 presentations, scientific. There were 12 peer-reviewed publications. 6 publications for extension outreach, 19 extension presentations, and then we've got 15 combination of websites, podcasts, webinars, videos, those types of things. There's 16 courses that include cover crops at MSU out of 3 different departments. If you go to the state report, once they get published, they're in grids like this, which will allow you to look at all the different research projects and go ahead and gives you the contact, people who are leading the projects if you want to contact them. I want to highlight just one at this point in time. I think this is kind of exciting for cover crops. And KBS, the Kellogg Biological Station, Hickory Corners, Michigan, is now funded for the long-term agro ecosystem research project. And if those of you who aren't familiar with this, it is basically a comparison of business as usual versus an aspirational system. Definition of the aspirational system is what do we want farmers to be doing 20 years from now? So that's kind of the time frame. It is a long-term project. And it's one of 18 sites, and it's only one of 2 sites that are not located at ARS experimental stations. So there's only 2 of those 18 that are in non-ARS locations. So the business as usual, in our case in Michigan, it's corn soybean rotation, conventional tillage, fertilizers, pesticides, GMO corn, soybeans, no cover crops, no manure, no irrigation, just your standard plant it, eat it up, and harvest it. And this is what I think is really exciting. The aspirational system is including all of these types of practices, and you can see a lot associated with cover crops there. Intercropping, nurse crops, relay cropping with cover cropping, including grazing and forage harvest, multi-species cover crops. The first year was last year. The aspirational system is a 5-year rotation at this point. Corn, soybeans, canola, and perennial forages are included in the rotation. Corn has got interseeding at B3, B5, green for the soybeans, and relay cropping with the canola. There's just a lot of opportunity in this system to include cover crops, and it is all entry points. These are 1 hectare. I think they're just under 1 hectare 4 rep plot scale, and also includes scale up fields. So there's going to be just wanted you to be aware of this going on. I think it's exciting, and it's something you're probably going to hear about a lot more in the future. Then I wanted to take the rest of my time to update this group on the precision ag sustainable ag education component. That grant had an education funding, and the idea was to develop a cover crop and agro ecosystems course. Of course, that was totally dedicated to cover crops, not just part of another course. I was part of that team, and what we did, we got a little bit of chop out there, but we've got 7 land grants went together to create a common cover crop class to use in all 7 institutions. It's myself and from Michigan State, Andrea Bash from Nebraska, Aaron Haramoto from Kentucky, Dara Park, Clemson University, Karen Renner also from Michigan State, Matt Ryan from Cornell, Richard Smith from University of New Hampshire, Kate Tully from University of Maryland, and Sam Wortman also from University of Nebraska. So we had quite a distribution, and we got together and we created a common course to use at all those institutions. This is the course description: it's for management, environmental, economic, and social considerations of cover crops across the diversity of agricultural production systems. Read the rest of that, you guys can read that. But essentially, this is what we want the students to be able to do by the end of this course. And you can see we're covering everything from defining cover crop species, functional groups, how to manage cover crops, economics of cover crops, looking at the environmental, how to make management decisions, and also we tied in some policy and social piece to this. These are the 13 modules. I'm not going to go through them in detail, but you can see all those things talked about what we want the students to do are covered in these 13 modules. And what we did was we had instructors teach different parts of the class from the different institutions. And what the strength of that is that they all had things that they kind of specialized in. So I don't know how many of you have taught classes, and there's always kind of a part of the class that you feel like you're teaching that you don't know a whole lot about. You wish someone else could teach that part, but you're stuck with it. We had the people that had the different expertise. The lectures were all recorded. So common lectures to watch across all 7 institutions. We had a list of quiz questions to pick from to create weekly quizzes at those institutions. We had common labs. We started out with common labs. They were kind of varied based on the facilities, lab facilities in each institution, but pretty much kind of followed the same format. Some included some things, some others. But in this case, we had the students participated in what we call a cover crop challenge. They all got the same cover crop seed, and they had to create a mix of their own, grow it in a plot, harvest it, and then they competed with every other school. And you can see that chart is showing the biomass results across all universities. We did things also like had them look at their cover crop plots and do the radar plot of the benefits that they saw. And then we compared the universities all to each other. And you can see on a lot of things they were fairly similar, but there were some things that varied based on climate. The really cool part about this is we got all the students together once a week in a synchronous Zoom session. And we broke them into groups with students from different universities working together in groups and gave them different exercises and tasks to do. So they actually had to work with students from other universities. The instructors all split up and took groups, and we used a lot of different tools. We would do like the muddiest concepts from lecture first, and then we go right into breakout rooms and have them work on different tasks. use jam boards and things like that. On your left there, part of the one of the exercises we had them do for 3 weeks in a row is they had to start from scratch and create their rotation for the county that their instructor was from for that breakout. And then they had to fit cover crops in there and come up with seeding rates, termination methods, all those types of things. So we had like, I did St. Joseph County in Michigan, which is in Southwest Michigan. But I had students from New Hampshire, Nebraska, Kentucky. And they had to go, we went into Cropscape to find out what's the common rotation there, and they created the rotation and started doing the cover crops. It was pretty cool. I really enjoyed it. We got a lot of student feedback. Students agreed that because of this course, they can confidently explain how cover crop management influences agronomic and environmental outcomes. And they got to see it in more than one state. You know, they were hearing other people talking about different climates, different soil types. It really broadened the students. They rated the learning value and quality of multi-site meetup SIG sessions where we all got together is very good. Valued the opportunity to learn from different instructors across the US. You know, just think about how would you like to listen to Eileen for the whole semester? Wouldn't you rather have instructors from other institutions be part of the class at least? I couldn't resist that. Most of the students appreciate the opportunity to learn and network across regions. Here's some comments. I wish every class gave students the opportunity to connect with folks from other universities. Again, talking about the same type of thing. And, you know, I think this is something that needs to be considered for the future of how we teach ag courses. We teach ag courses for you know, based on the area and the institution pretty much where they're being taught. The kids are not necessarily going to go to work in that state. You know, this gives them a bigger picture, bigger input. And I think it's something that is kind of ahead of its time. I've heard of institutions offering a class to another institution, but they basically take the same class that institution has. As far as splitting it up between all the institutions and working together to create the best course and leverage the instructors, it was a fun experience. Did have its frustration, but it was a fun experience. So Andrea is going to be here for the poster session. She has a poster on the that cover crop challenge and more details, pictures about how that went. So I encourage you to look her up on that. And then also there's a poster from Raksha Thapa. She's from Cornell. But if you want to talk to her, she actually took class this last semester, so she can tell you firsthand what it was like to take the class. And I think that's pretty much it. I think I missed it on the first. I hope you guys caught it on the first slide. We've had roughly 90 students through this in the 2 years we've done the course. So typically we have about 45 to 50 students across all 7 universities. And it is a 400 and grad level class. So that's why the classes aren't huge, because it is that level of class. So anyway, talk to me if you've got other questions as well. I thought it was pretty exciting. And our 13 seconds over.
Okay, we're gonna take a very quick coffee break, so if you wanna grab something to drink and bring it back. Okay, everyone. We're gonna get started with the Ontario report. All right, so Ann Verhallen is joining us virtually from Ontario. And I think the technology is working, so we're gonna turn it over to Ann.
Okay, greetings from the Great White North, and we're actually snowy, and I just want to do double check. You can hear me, right? Because I sure can't see you.
Yes, yep.
Okay. Okay, I am also going to stop my video at this point just because I am on rural internet, and you know the deal with rural internet, so. Okay, so with cover crops in Ontario, it's pretty exciting. I think last year I said that we've really made some headway, and we certainly have. And what we've seen with our latest census report is that about 1/3 of growers are reporting that they're using cover crops. And in some of the highly targeted areas with Ontario, that goes up to about 45%. However, let's see if I can actually get it to move. Come on. Okay. Apparently not. Let's try that way. Okay. But there's still a lot of work to do. I think most of us in the Midwest experienced that lovely blizzard just before Christmas. And this is right beside one of our well-known no-till cover crop gurus, long-term cover cropper in southwestern Ontario, so about an hour away from me, where he's got bare fields right beside him. And yet we have his cover crop definitely got to see a lot of soil being moved. We're at the end in the final year of our Canadian Agricultural Partnership. And if you want to liken this, it's a lot like your farm bill. This is the thing that funds a lot of activities. And one of them, some of the environmental pieces are focused on things like cover crops. So we're almost in a transition year. It's that kind of wait and see as we get ready for the next program. But it has funded a lot of cover crops. About 10% of the projects were cover crops, and that generally were some of the most highly demanded ones. And a lot of it focused on Lake Erie, the Leeds area. And we can certainly see greater uptake in that area. What we currently have right now is the Ontario On-Farm Climate Action Fund, or OFCAF. And this is federal funding that is targeted at what they think are the top 3 to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, that being nitrogen management, cover cropping, and rotational grazing. And this has definitely driven the number of cover crop meetings and the interest in cover crop this past fall. And sorry, I'm going to be talking really fast because for some reason, when I wasn't going to be able to be here, everybody gave me their stuff this year. It's amazing. Ecological Farmers is one of our farm groups for advocacy and research. One of the things that they really do well is this farmer-led research. A lot of work on cover crops and a lot of work in vegetable crops, particularly organic matter, organic vegetable production. They're heavily involved in the Living Lab project, which I'll talk about a little bit more in a sec, and the Farmers for Climate Solutions. They have got a whole cover crop training program, which I will get to right now. So this is a Canadian organic organization. They go right across Canada, and they have some significant funding from the federal government to do cover crop training, which is meant to be peer-to-peer. They train mentors, and then mentors facilitate workshops. So in Ontario, we've got 2 mentors, and they did several workshops on cover crops. I know later on in the winter, I'm going to New Brunswick and PEI to do something similar. Now, Living Lab, it's coming to the end of its 3-year thing, similar to our on-farm. These are our on-farm deep dive into different conservation methodology on-farm strips, and a lot of collaboration there. And there's 6 sites across the province under the Living Lab. With on-farm, there's 25, and they all look at slightly different things. But what's really cool about this is that it is involved with our federal researchers. So if you want to take a look at Living Labs Ontario, what you'll see are these little snapshots about the various federal researchers, people like Lori Phillips, who works in soil biology and microbiology, and she's taken some really deep dives into, and you'll recognize the name there, I'm sure, Woody Van Arkel, where he's got perennial cover crops between strips of standard crops, and she's been looking at the response of the microbial population to that and what's going on. She's not the only one. There's about 8 different federal researchers. They all have a different piece in this, and that makes it definitely very cool. Here's one of our other federal researchers, Shuming Yang. He's out of Harrow. He's been doing some cover crop, especially focused around legumes on a variety of different soil types. So we've got these heavy Brookston clay loams and then this lovely Harrow sandy loam that they can grow tomatoes on and all those kinds of things. And what he's been doing is growing cover crops and looking at the fertilizer nitrogen equivalent that it's being added. And this is with no starter. And you can see he's got some massive yields. And the fact that he's getting 160 plus bushel with on these Brookston clays, that's pretty nice too. Some other research that's ongoing is Dr. Karen Thompson. She's at Trent University, so that's more mid-east central Ontario. It's a little bit different environment than Harrow, of course. And she's got a lot of work going on with diverse cover crop mixtures. She's diving into the soil health and looking at greenhouse gases. And the really cool part about this, and I'll have more detail in the report, but it is work that's being done at Curve Lake First Nation. So it's small plot work embedded in the First Nation with a variety of different cover crops. And they are looking at nitrogen sources or ways to enhance nitrogen sources. So you can see that they've got AMS and Invita also with a control. And of course, this time of year, they're pretty much back in the lab, but gearing up to be out in the field doing some in-field greenhouse gas sampling in the coming spring. Some of the other projects, and again, this is really fast dash through everything that people sent me. Laura Vineyard, as lab, has put together a North American review looking at the influence of cover crops on 4 different spheres. So we're looking at atmosphere, hydrosphere, biosphere, lithosphere, and not surprisingly identified some major barriers, you know, termination, cost, and that whole uncertainty in economic gains. And I think we've already heard that from some of the reports already today. And not surprisingly, determine the research using systems-based approach is what we really need. And it's funny how many farmers tell me that too. Some other work that's been done, this is laid over top of Laura Vanier's long-term cover crop trial, working with Carrie Dunfield. She works in microbial communities, so it's looking at what the cover crop is doing to soil microbial communities and how that changes early tomato biomass. Because you got to remember, Ridgetown is in the far southwest, and we've got the chance to grow a lot of processing crops. And similarly, again, some work on Laura's plots, but this is with Cheryl Truman, so looking at disease suppression. And this is why with Laura's plots, we can see that we get economic gains with cover crops. Something is a little bit harder to document when we get into standard field crops. On a little bit of a different note, but still attached to cover crops, is some more economic work, looking at the adoption of beneficial practices to improve soil health. Not surprising, non-adopters focus on, you know, show me the money, give me the information, and get me talking to another farmer. And that's how we focused a lot of our work in Ontario, is that peer-to-peer learning. Some of the really new work, this is some work on the muck soils that are north of Toronto. So this is essentially kind of like the lettuce and celery belt of the province, and looking at clubroot resistance in the various brassica cover crops that are out there and being used, because of course there are brassica main crops in that area. Again, being led by Dr. Mary Ruth McDonald. Lots of interest in forage crops and the use of cover crops for forage. It's certainly expanding the feed possibilities for a lot of our dairy farmers. Here's some work by Dr. Kimberly Snyder out of the University of Guelph. For the last 2 years, you got to keep in mind, 2021 for most of us in Ontario was a very wet year, 2022, very dry. And you can see the response in the red clovers. Basically in 2022, we didn't get anything. And 2022 was a challenge for a lot of livestock producers in getting enough feed. So lots of cover crops being planted after, say, wheat or something like that in order to enhance their ability to have some feed. And one other project that really excites me, and this is some work by Dr. Joshua Nozinski in cooperation with Laura, and based out of Ridgetown, Kempville, and New Liskeard, looking at some biostrip work and using cover crops rather than strip till. And they seem to be getting some really nice response. The other piece that gets me is that it is Ridgetown, Kempville, New Liskeard. So the southwest, the far east of Ontario, and the north. It's really nice to see some work spread out across the province. And Josh also has some work targeted at the New Liskeard or Northern Ontario, looking at cover crop use and the ability to grow cover crops. And his data from New Liskeard shows very similar to what Dean Baas has talked about before with the board anyways, about a significant fall warming trend. And that's a big deal for these guys in Northern Ontario. So our Northern Ontario lines up with, say, Minnesota and Wisconsin and Northern Michigan. So they've got some findings and some suggestions about how to fine tune cover crops so that we're not taking suggestions from the far south and trying to take them to the north. Now, here's the last piece, and this is a little piece of video, and I really hope this works for us. This is Dr. Dave Hooker, and he's going to talk about his research at Ridgetown and Elora on some multi-species cover crops.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Dave Hooker, and I am a cropping systems agronomist, and I'm based at Ridgetown campus. This long-term trial was started in 2017. So just very briefly, 2 crop rotations times 2 tillage systems, and then we have various cover crop intensities associated with each one of those 4 combinations. In addition to these cover crop effects, we also have various nitrogen treatments. Some years, just tremendous biomass production, and this was taken at Ridgetown in 2021. So this is the amount of biomass harvested in November, right before freeze up. And so we get about 2 tons of biomass in the above ground portion. The blue bars indicate no nitrogen was applied after wheat harvest, and the green bars indicate about 50 pounds per acre that was applied of nitrogen after wheat harvest. When we look at oats, for instance, of course, oat is not a legume, and it really responded to that 50 pounds per acre of nitrogen after wheat harvest. And in our 3-way mixes, in our 10-way mixes, like we have a mix of legumes and non-legumes here, but we still see, that same trend of increasing biomass with 50 pounds per acre of nitrogen. So this is corn yields with only the starter nitrogen. So then we can see some evidence on how much nitrogen is coming from the soil or from previous nitrogen fertilization practices. So no cover, 157 bushel per acre. Red clover, 193, 194 bushels per acre. And this makes sense. This is our oat response to only starter nitrogen fertilizer. Corn is deficient of nitrogen, and we can see this 151 is about 6 bushel less than our no cover. Where we applied that 50 pounds per acre of nitrogen, we recovered some of that nitrogen, and the same pattern with our 3-way and 10-way. So just to conclude very quickly, again, 12 site years, a tremendous data set. There's no evidence that cover crop mixtures are better than monocultures. And 50 pounds per acre of nitrogen after wheat. Biomass increases. We've eliminated the oat yield drag that we showed. We do have data that shows that the CN ratio, it is reduced with nitrogen applied in the cover crops. That is one of the reasons I think why corn responds so favorably to this 50 pounds per acre of nitrogen. And then maybe we can reduce the nitrogen in our corn crop as well. So that's it for now. If you have any questions, here's my email address and my phone number if you want to get in touch with me if you have any questions or comments. Take care.
And that is it from Ontario. And sorry I can't be there.
All right, so I'm Sarah Noggle from Ohio State, and I'm just gonna kind of go through some of the things that we have been working on in Ohio. Hopefully. Okay, so if you didn't hear me, I'm Sarah Noggle, I'm from Ohio State. I'm gonna talk a little bit about some of the things that's going on in Ohio. So I looked at 2022 was a year of growth, collaboration, research, and education all in one, looking at cover crops. So one of the things that we continued with Ohio Department of Agriculture is the H2 Ohio program, which gave a cost incentive to use cover crops. That has expanded across to not just the Western Lake Erie Basin in Ohio, but more of the state in last calendar year. And so what that brought was additional work in cover crops. And so increased adoption of cover crops and getting to know those different parts. The other thing is that I think Eileen alluded to is partnerships. And I think that is some of the key that we look at in Ohio is whether it's retailers, soil and water, NRCS, commodity groups, extension, community members, farmers, again, looking at how does that affect water quality and conservation and soil health. Additionally, we have lots of partnerships with Soil Health Nexus, Midwest Cover Crop Council, USDA, and the SARE program. And so that's at local levels, regional, state, federal, and international. One of the things that just as a reminder for our report is we did host the Midwest Cover Crops Council meeting in 2022 in conjunction with Conservation Tillage and Technology Conference in March in Ada, Ohio. The other thing is we still continued education on the Midwest Cover Crop Tool Selector on how do you actually use that. And so we didn't have as many sessions as it wasn't quite as new, but in 2022, we had 6 presentations using that tool. Those were both in person and taught online, but we had 342 participants over those 6 sessions. Additionally, Anna shared that, but we have 23 new fact sheets that will be out on the Midwest Cover Crops Council website soon. I'll give a shout out because I know she's online to Rachel Cochran, who helped work through those. But what that is doing is combining the field guide, the selector tool, and then general information relevant to Ohio as another way to connect with cover crops. And so that intro of those, on the next slide, it talks about how do we connect. And one of the things that we needed was something for those beginners that also aid with those recipes. I need a little more information on how does this relate to what I'm doing. And so it's a actual handout front and back. They're no longer than that. And you can see just the top of one of those, but we have those grass species, legume, brassicas, and broadleaf. And so that's one of the projects we worked very hard on in this last year. Additional, we did a session called Reading the Landscape, and this was a partnership with the Soil Health Nexus and a grant. That is a train the trainer type of education. So it is working with those people working at NRCS, soil and water, and then in extension to actually look at different conservation programs in the landscape. And one section of that day was talking about the Midwest Cover Crops Council decision tool as an aid to conservation. And so we did have 4 states covered in that presentation. And we had 51 participants between some of the recorded sessions and the in-person. The other thing is we look at research. I'm not going to go a lot of information into specific projects, but one of the things is our eFields project book, and that is a quick turnaround of research reports from 2022 calendar year. So that came out in December. And so the specific ones to cover crops are interseeding cover crops, effect on corn, interseeding cereal rye, cover crop use as forages, row cleaners, and emergence of cover crops were some of those. And this you can't see, but when you get to that, it's an online book. And so you can actually click in the online book and get to different sections with those reports. One of the things that I do think, though, that is a plus for this eFields report is as we've expanded and started that in 2017 in Ohio, not every project obviously is related to cover crops, but the expansion of in-county partnerships across Ohio has grown greatly. And so we have one metric that is a soil health survey. And so that survey has been expanded. So since I'm not going to take time to go through that, if you want the QR code, you can scan that very quickly while you're here. If you're watching online to find that actual booklet, we actually have hard copies that I know we would probably be willing to hand out to people. The other thing that as we expanded that, so we have eFields, which is more of those direct crops. We now have eBarns in Ohio, and eBarns is how crops and livestock and just some livestock specific projects. And so there's one cover crop project in that eBarns. And so That's another one that as we expanded that, and that's using cover crops as a forage, looking at biomass production and cover crops. The other thing that we have is our annual farm science review in London, Ohio, and that's in September. One of the things is we've expanded the cover crop and educational area. We have a cover crop demo field for species identification, so people can actually go out there and say, what is this species that's growing, whether it's standalone species or in mixes. We still have a video series going on with that, so we can see some of those. And we also handed out MCC's field guides to producers during farm science review. The other thing is we had a winter webinar series on soil health last year, a soil health tour that is a drive your own type of tour. That soil health tour increased from just Northwest Ohio to covering more of Ohio, but we also added sites in Indiana and Michigan. And so that is an expansion of that. They are conservation-based sites relating to soil health or cover crops. And then what we do is we have a wrap-up soil health tour collaboration. So instead of you driving to a field day and going to different ones, you drive your own, there's QR codes, you find out what's at the site, you decide if you're going to go to 5 sites or 25 sites. And then what we do is bring the farmers, the producers, the researchers together and do a wrap up with a guest speaker. And we actually use Hans Schmidt from CCSI as our keynote speaker. Additionally, the information from our soil health webinar series, we had a focus of cover crops in part of those sessions. And so one of the things that we looked at was on the next slide, kind of what are the keys that we noticed. And I think that what I want to highlight is, as we're doing these winter soil health webinars and talking about cover crops, what do the participants want to learn more about in 2023? Intercropping, diverse crop rotations, cover crops, and manure and compost were some of those key takeaways from our soil health series. And so when we look at that, I think that's one of the things that is important to say, how are we expanding that education and research? The other thing is, as we look at, sorry, this shouldn't say, not all of these are new positions, but replacement positions, the soil health position, Dr. Steve Coleman had left Ohio State, so we have an opening in that one. We're also getting a vegetable crop position. And one of the things in the job description is there's a part for cover crops as that focus. We'll have a new organic position. The carbon sequestration and the carbon market educator, they're still waiting to fill those positions from 2021 as that was late in the year 2021. And then our farm management specialists, we expanded to 3 of those in Ohio, and one person, part of their job description is cover crop economics. And then trying to catch us up on time, some of the other grants that we have partnerships, we have a farmer advocate for conservation. And so that is a partnership with the Nature Conservancy. Again, that program started in 2021. This is year 2, so 2021 and then 2022. And so the year 2 results is they created 60 soil health and cover crop stewards across the state and along the Maumee River watershed was the key, but again, they didn't all sit in that area. So they have to give outreach as each one of those conservationists are trained, and they have to be a farmer. And so their goal is over a 2-year time period to each reach a minimum of 40 individuals on their education sessions. And so it's just a different way to expand the education that we're doing in Ohio. And then this one, the H2 Ohio program that I had talked about before is looking at sign up through our local soil and water conservation districts. And again, we are in year 3 of that program. Again, it expanded to farther across the states. And then if you have more questions on that, you can talk to me. And with that, this is my speed up on time. I told Eileen I would speed up, but if you have questions, I'll be around the next 2 days also. So that is it.
Did you bump me? That's a program next.
Oh, my afternoon, okay.
I didn't intend to.
Well, my bad.
All right, thank you very much. I'm Nathan Johanning. I'm Extension Educator for the University of Illinois Extension and the Illinois rep for the Cover Crop Council, here to give the Illinois report. All right, so I want to start off with, as we get into this, I'm going to hit on a few new positions and things in Illinois, but like everyone else, we have a vast network of different people, and what I'm going to share today is really just some snippets and highlights, and not anywhere near a complete list of things, but a few things especially that people provided. So one thing to note is we have a new a field and crop agronomist on campus. Giovanni Prezefontes is our new agronomist, taking over the role that Emerson Nafziger had, although he's still working in retirement. So we're happy to have him. And he has a lot of history in working at Kansas State, and then doing his degrees, and also University of Illinois in various cover crop projects, including some with just how to incorporate them into production systems, and also looking at some of the tile nitrate loads and how cover crops can help alleviate some of those. So we're excited to have him on board, and as of this fall, and hopefully more projects in the future. So another thing, this is actually a project that I'm working on, is a research project across Illinois at 5 sites, looking at cover crop species, planting date, and seeding rate. So this is a project looks at cereal rye at 3 planting dates, 4 seeding rates, and 2 termination timings ahead of soybeans, and then looking at crimson and balanza clover before corn at 3 planting dates across 5 locations throughout Illinois, which we have distributed, as you can see, across the state, which represents a large geographical area as far as the different climates, growing conditions, and things. So we're very excited to understand better how we can, this kind of a complete set of how all these cover crops react, especially some of the clovers, but even looking at the different seeding rates of rye, understanding then the amount of biomass and cover crop performance and crop yield we get out of those as a result of that. So myself and some colleagues from some of the other universities and other extension educators are partnering on this, and this is a project that was funded by the Illinois Soybean Association. So this is a snippet of what this looks like. So this was at our Belleville site, which is in one of our southern sites. This is crimson clover. As you look at them listed there, planted. This was taken in early December, planted on the 3rd of October, October 17th, and then November 3rd. So you can see that's the kind of the grading we're looking at. And so our goals is then, of course, this is, we want to see is like, what does this look like in the spring? What does this look like in April or May? So that's, we're kind of excited to see that. And I like it just because it gives, it's a very laid out project that kind of gives us a lot of the answers to those questions. And hopefully we can repeat this in future years to get also the climate variation on top of our planting dates. Another project, another colleague of mine is doing in Southern Illinois and working with is a project that's looking at high tunnel production. We do have a fair amount of specialty crop production and high tunnels, and trying to figure out how can we utilize cover cropping systems to improve the soil health. And the high tunnels, these soils are very heavily cropped in these intensive systems, and since they're exclusive of rainfall, there's issues with salt accumulation and other things like that. And so looking at how we can utilize those, and also insect control. Lots of pests can become problems. How can we use cover crops to improve the soil, but also maybe help to bridge those beneficial insects in our protected culture production as well. So that's a project. This example is where they, and this project had oats and crimson clover. This was planted early October, and then I think since then this was taken in early December. We had the cold weather we had around Christmas time terminated oats, but the crimson clover still continues to grow in there. So next, I want to move on, just hitting on a few slides from some of our partners. As I mentioned through the project that we were working on earlier, the Illinois Soybean Association is also invested a lot of efforts in trying to support research and support outreach to farmers, and especially as you see highlighted here, looking at trying to focus on soil water quality and land stewardship and agricultural resiliency. So they've been focusing a lot, not exclusively, but a lot on cover crops. So they've have a lot of collaborations through all of our major universities and conservation districts and other groups, all doing some of the work on this and looking at some of the different resources, whether it be through online or other print resources to have, in addition to putting together lots of research videos and trying to really promote that through their membership and throughout soybean production, making it, I think, more of a kind of a normal in production. So they have calls for proposals, and these are just a short list of some of the proposals you can see here that are all regarding that they funded, that all have influences of cover crops within them, whether they be direct or otherwise. So they, in addition to this, these projects like the one that I mentioned that we're doing, many others, also they have partnered with doing some advanced soil health trainings and another round of those. I believe, if I remember right, I think it was the 5th round that we've had. Don't quote me on that, but we've had multiple rounds of soil health trainings around the state. And there are Better Bean and Soybean Summit are also some major farmer conferences and meetings. They're trying to bring forth some of these, some of the different aspects of cover cropping and some of these projects then being able to use to fuel the material for these different local programs and farmer outreach. And in addition to all of the other projects, the Illinois Soybean Association has their own team of agronomists, which is in the last year has went from 1 agronomist up to 6 agronomists. And so they're also doing a lot of outreach and other things that's been really nice. Another one I want to mention is a partnership called Precision Conservation Management. I'm just going to hit a highlight of that. So there's a lot here, but the highlight of what this Precision Conservation Management or PCM does is it's a checkoff funded program that's basically trying to provide one-on-one assistance for farmers to help adopt some conservation practices and making some financially sound decisions on that. So this was started by the Illinois Corn Growers Association along with the USDA RCPP grant award, and since then has been also supported by the Soybean Association. And so there's a PCM specialist that have been, they're expanding throughout the state and have a decent amount of coverage throughout the state and expanding as it can. And so their specialists often are partnered, housed with the soil and water conservation districts. And those will help to understand some of the financial implications of these conservation practices, with cover crops and no-till being the main focus. And so there's 7 regions throughout Illinois where they're housed. Also have a little bit of outreach into Kentucky, and also one northeastern located targeted watershed. So what they're doing is they're working based on in-field practices. They collect some of the data directly from the farmer, and they're compiling some of that using some of our economic data as far as practice prices and things like that. They're not sharing any of this. They're aggregating all of it to provide information back to how you compare and generalizations across the state. But then the farmer can get a personalized report on these practices and how they are managed. And so they have a portal where they can go to individual farmers and log in to get their information. So this is one really neat highlight that I just heard one of the specialists shared at a meeting just this past week. And so one of their comments was, how does tillage stack up? So they basically summarized all this information from their participants and pulled out some highlights with the specific tillage, which of course goes hand in hand with a lot of our cover crops. And they said in the top 25% of our most profitable fields, 77% of the cornfields were either strip till or no till, or had like a one light tillage pass. When you switch to soybeans in that top 25% of the most profitable, 42% were no till and 20% were like a single light tillage pass. And with all of this, with more than 2 tillage passes was never the most profitable system in any of the cropping systems. Even if they had a higher yield, that yield never, with some of the economic data, and that yield never compensated for the added expense of making those passes. So I thought that was some really, really eye-catching information to come that they were able to generate through some of that. So I also want to share a few things from the some work that the American Farmland Trust does. We're going to hear more about that from Chris Reynolds tomorrow, so I don't want to steal all this thunder. But I will hit on a few of those things. One of the projects has been this Fall Covers for Spring Savings program, which basically gives farmers a discount on their crop insurance, a premium discount where they're using cover crops. This had a capped enrollment, so we met the 100,000 acres that was allotted for 2022, and there was applications for the 2023 put in. We had 140,000 available, and we had over 175 as applied for. So we're having, it's at least good, we're in a way we have more demand than what we have acres to support. So that's been a very good program. And from this, I think it started off as a 50,000 acres that very first year, a few years back. So it's increased in support. So that's been a good. We also had around 467,000 acres received support through our pandemic cover crop program for a premium discount. Also, American Farmland Trust has done some good work to help on some fact sheets and how to basically how cover crops can help contribute to climate solutions. And so they have a new brief out on that. That's a great resource for we have. They also have the Illinois Cover Crop Initiative. And so this, and I'll let Chris hit on all the details of this. There's basically a little bit shy of 100,000 cover crop acres that were enrolled in this across the state. And with this, the farmers receive a $10 per acre payment on that. I'll let Chris share all the great details of that. But also, American Farmland Trust has all kinds of outreach. A lot of these are partnerships through the different groups that they work with. And so a lot of field days and events all throughout the state. One other highlight they do is there's the network of the Illinois Cover Crop On-Farm Network. And so there's a whole group of cover crop specialists, and I'm a part of this, that get together for monthly calls just on different topics. I know we had Anna last year present to that group on the Cover Crop Council. I've shared some research and other things, so it's a really good group, and they're able to kind of do some professional development and for farmers, and also share that in some really nice blog recaps of all of those different topics that are included. And then also through that, they've recently put out a cover crop incentive directory and stacking matrix, which basically looks through all the different programs for payment that are out there and lays out the pros and cons for those, as far as the requirements for those. And then there's a stacking directory, which you can't read, but in that table basically lists all these different programs, whether it be equip or any others, and it gives you a check on which ones where you can stack them together and which ones you can't stack, which is obviously with all these programs, how many of them can you put together? And so it's a good layout of that. And the last thing with the Sustainable Ag Partnership is they do have some featured farmers and look at the different cover crop specialists and things that are out there, and have a story map. So various people, and whether it be demonstration plots, research providers, or those of us that are part of the Illinois Sustainable Ag Partnership, are located on the map. So if someone goes in a certain area, they can help to find, where there might be some cover crop specialist, someone that has some background knowledge to understand and know where they can get the help and resources. So with that, that was at least a brief overview of some highlights and things we have going on in Illinois. So.
And the book at 8.
No, the book is 14:45.
Let me see if I can get this. Hold on, I have a video to do this. Yeah, we might be holding it. I still think that was.
Well, good afternoon and greetings from Kansas. I'm going to take this opportunity to share reports from a couple of our ongoing research projects related to cover crops. And so the first one is our Kansas Agricultural Watershed Field Laboratory. This project was started by a group of faculty in 2014. Dr. Nathan Nelson is the lead, and you can see the many graduate students and faculty members involved in this project. The overarching themes of the watershed are to understand how does fertilizer source, placement, and rate affect soil health, what effect will cover crops have on soil health, and how do the interaction of the fertilizer and cover crops affect nutrient cycling and loss in this corn soybean cropping system. So this is a summary slide from the first phase of the project. During the first phase, we focused on a build and maintain phosphorus management philosophy with either fall broadcast or spring 2x2 placement. And what I'll highlight here is this panel is total phosphorus. And we can see that in 2016 and 17, we had no effect. In 2018, with cover crops, we saw an increase in total phosphorus. And in 2019, we saw more total phosphorus loss without cover crops. So this highlights that weather does play an important role in phosphorus loss patterns. But the interesting thing, and when we look at this over 4 years, we've seen a 41% increase in dissolved reactive phosphorus. And you can see here in 2016, 17, and 18, and in all 3 of these years, we saw a significant increase in dissolved phosphorus in the watersheds where we had cover crops compared to no cover crop. And in 2019, we had no effect. Another way to look at this data is to look at it by fertilizer timing. And so the orange bars represent fall broadcast, the blue bars represent spring injected, and the gray bar represents our control where we've had no additional phosphorus added to the system since the project started in 2014. And so what we can see where we've not applied any phosphorus, 40 to 50% decrease in total, 60 to 70% decrease in dissolved phosphorus, but no statistical difference whether that was fall broadcast or spring injected. Although there is a tendency for that spring injected to show signs of lower loss. When we look at it in terms of the yield and the benefit to the producer, the control where we were not applying phosphorus negatively impacted grain yield. And so when we think about this in terms of the phosphorus cycle, Status quo is here where we expect to see particulate phosphorus loss as our largest phosphorus pool, and then dissolved P loss as a smaller pool. What we found in those first phase of the project was we saw a flip of that where we added cover crops into the cropping system. We saw more dissolved phosphorus loss and less particulate phosphorus loss. So as we evaluated where we were at in 2019, the question was, what else can we look at and how can we find an alternate management that both reduces dissolved P loss and particulate phosphorus loss? And so that's where we headed starting in 2020. We stayed with our no-till corn soybean rotation. The control stayed at no additional phosphorus. Sufficiency is being managed first, and in the 3 years of data that I will show in drawdown, and then we feel about at the point where we'll need to start adding phosphorus back to be able to maintain yield. And then the build and maintain was managed under a maintenance program, and you can see the phosphorus addition rates there. The cover crop on the first phase, we experimented with cereal and brassicas. Most of the brassicas never did much, and so we've settled on cereal rye as our cover crop. And in 2020, our biomass that year was 1.6 tons to the acre. In 2021 was 0.2 tons to the acre. We had a dry winter in 2021, and that was also a corn year. So in Kansas, we're terminating 2 weeks prior to corn planting, and corn planting is in mid-April. And so looking at the water quality metrics, we've seen some interesting trends. Annual sediment loss, we've continued to see a positive effect of cover crops on sediment loss and a positive effect on particulate phosphorus loss. Now, when we look at the dissolved reactive phosphorus, with these fertilizer management of control sufficiency and build and maintain, we now have a cover crop by phosphorus interaction. And so we have a more complicated graph to look at. But a couple of the takeaways, if you look, the set of bars within each year to the right are the plots with cover crops. And one of the things that we can see right away is with cover crop and build and maintain, we see our highest dissolved phosphorus loss. The no cover crop build and maintain within that group of treatments with no cover crops has a tendency to be higher, but is not always significant. The sufficiency where we've been drawing down, we see lower dissolved phosphorus loss and generally is intermediary between the build and maintain and the control plots. So I think this highlights that we've got fertilizer management decisions play a role and we can manage that. But the addition of a cereal rye cover crop in this case does present some challenges when we're controlling dissolved reactive phosphorus loss. In terms of soil biological properties, we've looked at a range of properties. We've looked at carbon cycling enzymes, and we tend to see higher carbon and nitrogen cycling enzyme activities where we've added cover crops. That same trend stays true for suite of phosphatase enzyme activities. And so we had the opportunity to dive deeper in 2018, and we've collected samples this past year as well, and are in the process of doing the analyses to look at the soil biological community in greater detail. And so we're looking at data, phospholipid fatty acid data here. of key microorganism groups. And the interesting thing is we don't see a real difference in the microbial community between the cover crop and the no cover crop treatments. What we see is that the microbial community is larger or greater biomass where we've added the cover crops. And so more work continuing on that. It'll be interesting to see if adding the sufficiency factor adds additional complexity to the system and we start to see some differences in the microbial community. My student, Amber Pescat, has been working to look at soil health measures over the growing season. And so each box plot represents a sampling time from cover crop termination out to harvest, with about a 20-day interval for the first set, and then the orange bar is at harvest. And so we did not pick up a cover crop effect with soil respiration, microbial biomass carbon, or active carbon, although you can see that we have differences depending on the growing, the point after cover crop termination as we get out into the growing season. Interestingly, though, acid phosphatase was one of the soil health indicators that did pick up a time by cover crop interaction, and the cover crop plots tend to have more variability in their enzyme activity expression, but they're also have higher activity than the no cover crop treatment at each sampling time. So some interesting data. I know I get a lot of questions about when is the right time to go sample for soil health. I think what we can start to pull from this is the real importance is to be consistent year in and year out. I think that has the greatest chance to get at some meaningful data that can be interpreted. So just wrapping this up, cover crops decrease sediment, particulate P loss. However, this was countered by an increase in dissolved P loss. We've seen a positive effect on soil health, although not a change in the microbial community structure, just a larger microbial community structure. During the drawdown phase of our sufficiency management, we did decrease the dissolved reactive P relative to the build and maintain, and then the time component that I've already mentioned. So just one last set of slides. This is from our long-term cover crop study. I've shared results from this project with the group in prior years. This is part of the Precision Sustainable Ag USDA NIFA funded project led out of North Carolina State. And what we're looking at here is some data from our Common Experiment 1, which looks at cereal rye and nitrogen response. And what we see here is our chem fallow and our double crop soybean, which is a cash crop alternative that we have in our rotation. Their yield is optimized at about 160 pound nitrogen rate. For all of our cover crop treatments, we continue to see lower yields where the chem fallow and the double crop soybeans were optimized. And just to highlight what we're looking at with the red line, and if we carry this line across, it really takes almost 240 pounds of nitrogen for the cover crop treatments, those being cereal rye, crimson clover, 50-50 mix of cereal rye, and then a multi-species fall cover crop mix. So with that, I'll be happy to take any questions. No questions. Eileen didn't give me the hook, but she said no questions.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the invitation to give the first in-person update from Manitoba for the Midwest Cover Crop Council. It's exciting to be able to travel here again. This is my first trip to the United States since pandemic, and it feels really great to be with you all and in this community. So I thought, this is probably the most important slide as a new member of the Midwest Cover Crop Council. Where are we at in Manitoba? What's the context for cover crops in Manitoba? We are, the northern frontier of cover crops, and we have some extreme environmental challenges in terms of our short growing season, our dry falls that we often have, and wet springs. And so I can identify with many of the challenges that have been described here with weather. We have a community of early adopters that we have been engaging with, and they have a need for knowledge networks. We have some cost share programs that Anne described that are national in scope that are being introduced, and this is creating a new need for agronomists to receive training so that they can advise farmers to participate in those programs. So there's a huge hunger for knowledge. And therefore we have a growing team that is interested in becoming engaged with the network at the Midwest Cover Crop Council. And we've been getting that engagement going over the last year. Where Manitoba joined the Midwest Cover Crop Council, we have worked to develop a webpage presence for Manitoba. We have engaged in terms of preparing to develop a decision support tool by coordinating how and developing a plan for weather data that can be put into our decision support tool, and developed a cover crop fact sheet for the recipe series based on a graduate student project on green seeding that just concluded. So that was pretty exciting. As I mentioned, there's a huge need for extension, and one of the projects that we collaborated with the Manitoba Association of Watersheds to develop was this fact sheet and planning guide so that farmers, staff, and other agronomists could take this resource and start to plan for participation in some of these programs. Other extension events have largely focused on sharing information from two really important surveys in Canada that happened in 2020, both in the prairies in Ontario, about the status of cover cropping. And one of the interesting things that has happened over the last year, my graduate student, Callan Morrison, who's here presenting some posters at the meeting, has been taking a look at the set of farmers who participated in these voluntary surveys, but weren't yet growing cover crops. And so I invite you to check out his poster about the hesitant and the curious. And it's really interesting from this one survey question about what would enable cover crop use, just how different the responses are between those that responded that were interested in trying cover crops versus those that aren't interested in trying cover crops. So those that are looking for technical assistance, they're looking for local information and research, and those that it's not even, well, they were interested enough to take the survey but not interested enough to try cover crops. They're not looking for much. They don't think this is going anywhere, but they're curious. So because of this, the challenges that we have, one of the things that has been a really important project for us in Manitoba is to engage with farmers in on-farm research. And we have a growing culture of on-farm research. And so it's really exciting to see cover crops come into the fold. We have 6 multi-year sites where we're growing cover crops repeatedly within the farmer's chosen crop rotation. And we have replicated strips where we just compared our control treatments where there's no cover crops being grown in the fall to where we're planting cover crops in the fall. But there's an interesting twist on our control treatment that I'm gonna foreshadow here as we go through this. So we're trying to collect a range of measurements to quantify cover crop performance because there is, you know, how much cover crop can you actually grow on this northern frontier? Does that biomass actually mean that there are, you know, treatment effects on the soil? And then how does that impact a subsequent cash crop performance and economics in the short run? So one of the interesting questions over this 3-year period that we've been running this trial is just how often we can include cover crops in annual crop rotations in Manitoba. And we can see that there are some years where we had, you know, complete participation or complete ability to grow cover crops and years where we didn't. And the 2019-2021 year sort of aligned with where farmers were growing cereals in their rotation, and when we have broadleaf crops in our rotation, you know, there we have more challenges in having a window to grow cover crops. This also interacts with weather and where we have, you know, dry periods and wet periods, and this really comes out in our above ground biomass data set here that you can see. So, you know, our axis here doesn't go very high in terms of, you know, kilograms per hectare. If I have, you know, 1,000 kilograms per hectare, I would have been doing really well in the first 2 years of the project. We had a really wet fall in 2021, and a lot of the farmers had decided to plant fall rye. We had very late termination. I was identifying with Anna and her story from Minnesota. A lot of farmers were surprised how much biomass they grew when they couldn't get into terminating rye. So you'll notice that we have significant bars in our control treatment. So one of the challenges or opportunities that came out of this experiment was just the role of volunteers. And in our really short growing season environment, I think we need to be really strategic about how we think about volunteers and how we manage those volunteers, which is not a new story here for this group. But I think in our short growing season environment, we need to become experts in how we can utilize and augment volunteers. We also quantify the impact on cash crops, and very similar to many of the presenters here today, we see in just a few cases or one case here a significant decline, but there are numerical trends. And when we take those numerical trends and multiply them by really high, you know, grain prices, we see negative crop revenue when we run these numbers through our economic calculator that we developed, and then we, you know, layer in our increased cost to plant and grow the cover crop. So having this data, I think, really can ground policy in reality, especially for annual grain cropping systems across the prairie. So while we have lots of potential for adoption of cover crops, you know, it's really valuable to provide policymakers with why might we have challenges to adoption, and then work from the starting place, work from where we're at. So this on-farm experiment connects with a series of ongoing research projects. On-farm work also engaged with the Eastern Prairies Living Labs program with Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada, and talked about the Living Labs program in Ontario. We have one in Manitoba. The on-farm experiments in both of those, through both of these networks, connects with long-term experiments that we have at several sites at the University of Manitoba, where we're looking at annual crop rotations, where we're looking at greenhouse gas measurements, how cover crops interact with tillage systems, and as well through livestock at the National Center for Livestock and Environment. Lots more that could be discussed there. We also have some experiments that are just focused on the agronomy of cover crops, and I think that's where we have the most significant work to do right now in Manitoba. Some interesting new trials that have started in the last year connect with the potential for using spring nurse cover crops for flea beetle management. Some observations from agronomists were picked up by the Canola Council, and they were interested in pursuing this idea. I feel like that's sort of a landmark change for me as a researcher, seeing a big industry group like that, seeing cover crops as a solution. We're also have a new project started looking at how we can interseed cover crops with wheat and canola. Again, those are major acre crops, and if we can find a few simple strategies that are compatible with herbicide systems, then, you know, maybe we've got a system that we can start moving into some larger acres on the prairies. All right, as Anne had mentioned, Canada is renegotiating its 5-year federal funding programs for agricultural research. And so with that comes a lot of proposal development, and it's been really exciting to see the amount of researcher interest, as well as just having cover crops on the list of BMPs for some of these major programs. So I'm optimistic that we will see a lot of new and interesting projects coming through the Ag Canada Cluster Program, as well as the renewal of the Living Labs program across Canada. One other interesting project that's brewing in Manitoba right now is an interest in seed coatings. And I bring this up here to this audience because I'm really interested in hearing about what people in this community already know about seed coatings. Obviously, you know, conditions are different, but one of the strategies that one of the models for moving cover crops forward in our short growing season environment, similar to no-till, is could we have a one-pass seeding system to plant our cover crop seed, have it sit there until we are able to spray for weed management, and then have them magically emerge in June. Is that a dream? Maybe, what did I see? An aspirational system. I think that's an aspirational system idea that we want to work with in Manitoba. And if there are those here or virtually that have already been down this road, I would love to hear from you. So with that, I conclude my report on Manitoba, and myself and my graduate students are here to engage with this community, and we're looking forward to that engagement.
All right, it's time for another quick break. If you could be back at 4 o'clock. Okay, it is 4 o'clock. I have a few announcements as everyone's slowly filtering back into the room. First of all, on your agenda, it says that the poster session ends at 6. That is incorrect. We'll keep that going until 6:30. And there will be poster judging during that time, some networking. If you'd like a drink or a snack, you can go down the hall to Frankie's. But please come back and visit the posters. We're really excited about the graduate student posters. They worked really hard. Please come back and check those out. The second announcement is if you are a CCA, we have CEUs for today. I will leave one up here and I'll start passing one around. That way, before you leave, you can check it out up here if it gets lost in the shuffle. I had one other thing. Oh, if you did not register, it would help us out if you just went to the registration desk and found your name and put a checkbox there, so we kind of have a count on people. And that way we know to have lunch for you tomorrow as well. So those are my announcements, and then now I'm going to turn it over to Marisol.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for staying. I know it's kind of late and it's sleepy this time, but I'm really glad to be back here in person after a few years without being in person. So I'm really happy to be able to see everyone. And so I'm just gonna show more of the shift that we have in our research in the last year. We used to work a lot with cover crops and evaluate production, biomass and stuff. But in the last 2 years, and thanks to a lot of funding that we got from NIFA, we're shifting more to evaluate, well, we still evaluate the biomass here, but evaluate ecosystem services. And so we're trying to move towards that, and also amateur science. So we work also with a lot of forages, and that's important too, because they cover the soil too, so we can consider them cover crops too. So they're not necessarily annual. So I kind of want to show that And advance for this. Just like we did. Okay. Which ones? Did I just say enter? Okay, wait, I'm gonna. Just a moment. All right, so that's why I have this list, and really this is where we're going to start focusing. And actually, with my students this past year, we are focusing in all these ecosystem services, reducing erosion. We're starting to measure or model greenhouse gases emissions, runoff, leaching, biodiversity. We have a big project on biodiversity, and I'm really excited because I never realized how many insects there are on a crop. My students just got in the summer these they call pitfall traps, and they got 39 families of insects, just in about four weeks. It's really interesting what happens. So, and then we're working also, of course, soil health in general, right? And sequester carbon in the soil. We get a lot of questions about these. Cover crops sequester carbon. And so we are starting to work on that with collaborators. We're working a lot on weed suppression, and also in North Dakota we have a lot of problems with soil salinity, and so it is a very important tool for us, the cover crops, for reducing salinity. It's kind of difficult, so I got a lot of animations. You know all of this, but one important thing here is when the most typical rotation for us would be wheat and soy, not corn and soybean, right? We do have corn and soybean in the eastern part. And in wheat and soybean, we do have an opportunity for cover crops in the fall, right? And the fall time. So this one for that. Okay, so we have a window there. If we don't have a cover crop, we have losses, right, of nutrients. Several have been speaking about phosphorus and nitrates. And also we have another window in the spring. We get really wet springs, like Yvonne was saying. And so we're gonna get losses there. And then a lot of erosion. We're very flat, and we get a lot of wind erosion when we don't have any cover, both in the fall and in the spring. When we put a cover crop, a lot of things happen, and that's why we're interested in trying to quantify these ecosystem services, right? When we have a cover crop, we reduce those nutrient losses, we reduce the erosion, we increase diversity, right, and carbon sequestration, and then we improve quality. So those are the things that we're really interested, because in the wheat and soybean system or rotation is really not an excuse to say that I can't put cover crops, right? And corn and soybean is very difficult for us, but you do have a window to do it. So we are trying to convince the farmers to do this. The reduction of greenhouse gases and carbon sequestration, there is a lot of things going on with this. We get a lot of questions, so we're trying to evaluate. We know just by covering the soil, you reduce soil respiration and also nitrate losses. Most of the nitrate losses come with fertilizer that we put in there that is lost wear. And also by working forages, so we do a lot of cover crops, in grazing. I know our poor cows are being blamed for the methane, but when we have grazing system, the nutrient cycling is very important, and a lot of people don't realize that the methane comes from the carbon in the plants. They fix CO2, so it's not like this methane is coming, out of fossil fuels, as the things say that. So there's a lot we can talk about. We can talk a whole day about that, and I'll defend my cows. Cows are important in the system, the nutrient cycling, the animal soup, livestock integration and systems. It's very, very important. And so, and the last part, like I said, the biodiversity part is both above ground and below ground. I'm working with a lot of collaborators, so we are working. We think biodiversity. We think right away of insects, right, and butterflies and bees. But we we have to also look at all the other arthropods like spiders. I don't like them, but it's incredible the amount of spiders. And also, and the importance of these, I've been learning a lot about entomology. The importance of all these groups of insects and families and the functions that they have. Each one of them have different functions. And below ground, I'm working with microbiologists, the specialists in microbiome. We have two soil microbiome specialists. And then one is working mainly with legumes and rhizobia populations, and the other one's working with mycorrhiza and the rest of the microbiome. Working with both of them, Dr. Samiran Banerjee and Dr. Barney Geddes, the assistant professors that were just hired a couple of years ago. And so we've been very successful, and we've been able to get many grants from NIFA to be able to do this fun work. It's really been fun to learn about all these things. And so we have, and the last one we got is intercropping, and I'll have a talk on intercropping tomorrow, so I'll show that there. It's intercropping with sunflower and sorghum in North Dakota and South Dakota. Chris Graham is part of this grant, and Sarah Balder in South Dakota. So really interesting things that we're gonna start doing. So in the cover crops and forage research, I've had a lot of graduate students. I have many new ones. I have 4 new ones, and they're gonna be here. And also I got a new postdoc. It took 6 months to get here because of visa problems. She's from Brazil. She's a soil scientist, and she's coming up February 1st, finally, after visa problems. Yeah, she's a soil scientist expert on soil carbon cycling and livestock integration in Brazil. That'll help a lot here. And then we have many collaborators within NDSU and the different stations. We have 11 experiment stations across the state. And also we are collaborating with South Dakota and with many other states through our CAP grant. We have one of the million SAS with caps for forages, and we got 24 states in that, so a lot of them. But a lot of fun things that we're doing. So one of the projects that we work and we're finishing is the diversity of microbiome that you get when you have intercropping. I'll talk more about intercropping, but I wanted to show the microbiome diversity. We did a sampling in both North Dakota and South Dakota of alfalfa plants, and also alfalfa plants with or without corn intercropping. And it was evaluated for the mycorrhiza, mycorrhiza fungi, and also for we took a lot of other measurements, soil health and nutrients, but also for rhizobia, strains, different rhizobia. Very interesting results are just coming out from my colleagues, and I'll show you just a little bit about that. Dr. Karki, then she was at South Dakota State University, and now she's in University of Missouri. She did all the work on the mycorrhiza, and what we found is interesting because in both rhizobia and mycorrhiza was the same thing. When we did intercropping alfalfa corn, we had more mycorrhiza in both the alfalfa and the corn. And also the rhizobia, there were more nodules. So when 2 plants grow together, you get more of those. Very interesting things. And also, for some reason, we got more colonization and found more mycorrhiza on the North Dakota sites. And then the South Dakota could have been because of the size of the sample. We don't know yet. And then grazing has some greater impact in colonization than hay fields, because we were taking a lot of other information. Very interesting information. Dr. Buting still doing the metagenomics to be able to show the diversity of the microbiome and all these samples of it. Very interesting work, but when she moved, it was in the middle of the pandemic, and so it's been a little slow. Dr. Geddes also has a NAFA project where the same samples, he evaluated the number of nodules and correlated with pH, electrical conductivity, and availability of soil nitrogen. We took soil samples in every place we sampled. It was a really fun sampling trip. And you can see there's a highly correlation with nitrogen, and we know that, right? When we have high nitrogen in the soil, then nodule numbers is lower, which is known, right? And there's also pH. We know legumes in general don't like low pH, especially alfalfa doesn't like low pH. So you can see we have less number of nodules when we have low pH. And so interesting things, and Dr. Geddes also is doing all the metagenomics and evaluating all the strains that he found, and these pictures are from him. Very interesting work that he's doing, not totally related to cover crops, but the idea is to be able to start looking at other things in just yield and be able to see the diversity of microbiome in the soil when you introduce different plants or different systems. And like I said, the arthropods, which has been, we're just starting, but it was just amazing to see that we have different crops, wheat, sunflower, soybean, summer fallow, and alfalfa. You can see the different, I know it's kind of small, but complete different amount instead of number of insects on the traps per week. Okay, so the traps in 1 week will get happy. Okay. And then another thing that was really interesting, the families, there were, like I said, 39 different families, but there were about 4 families, the most common in all of them. And some crops, like the wheat, had all the crickets, the gravy. And while the alfalfa, I had a lot more plosive, which are those spiders, which I don't like. So it's interesting, we did a field day and show the farmers the crops, and they were like, oh, wow, that's very interesting. So we have a lot more colorations, a lot more things are going in North Dakota, but just want to show you a little bit of a summary of what we're doing on my project. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, my name is Katja Koehler-Cole. I'm giving the Nebraska updates. I'm from Nebraska. I'm an extension educator. I just moved into that role a little less than a year ago. So before that, I worked in the Department of Agronomy. That's probably where most of you know me from. I'm giving the update. I think that's something that Gary used to do. So he retired, but and what I want to talk about today are mostly projects that have started in 2022 in Nebraska. I don't have a lot of data, and it's projects that, you know, my colleagues have sent me the information to. So I'm trying to move it, but it's not. Oh, geez. Right, yeah, okay, good. Do this. So first I'm gonna give a little bit of an update about the research that's going on in the department. So these are all the people that are involved in soil health. So quite a few, and a couple of papers that have come out on soil health and cover crops. Some of them are from large on-farm studies, so we're pretty excited about that. And moving on into some of our research projects that have started in 2022. So this is a study with Dr. Kaiser in the agronomy department, and this is a study where we are applying biochar and combining it with cover crops. So we applied the biochar in the spring, last spring, and if you know anything about Nebraska, it's always windy. It was a fun experiment. Yes, I was never so happy to have been wearing a mask, I guess. And the next one is a study, or actually a new soil health initiative, urban soil health initiative with Dr. Bertman. He is a horticulturalist, and this is actually a partnership with NRCS, of which we have several, but the exciting thing here is that we're working with gardeners and community gardens in Nebraska, so. I think this is already the last new research project. I know there are several others, but this one I'm very excited about. So Andrea Baas, who's coming later today, most of you probably know her. She's the PI on a collaborative agreement between UNL and NRCS. This received over $1 million in funding and started 2022. We had the first trial, so we are doing cover crop variety trials across Nebraska. It's going to be 3 years. We have 6 sites each year, 4 different establishment times. So the pictures here. So some of it we're planting just, the standard fall planted cover crop into corn or soybean. But we're also having an early spring planting where we're just going in March and then terminating in May. And we decided to do that in Western Nebraska. So that was also interesting, but we did get a decent amount of biomass. Some of the pictures in the top corner are from there. Then we have a post-weed planting, and then we also have a full season planting. This is the picture of our full season planting. So this, and I think I may be the first one who really talked a lot about irrigation, but this was planted in North Platte, so central Nebraska, under a pivot with fertilizer applied through the pivot. So this was the, I think, ideal situation for cover crops. It was all one season species, some of them mixes. I think we had 20 different treatments. It was amazing. It was amazing to see what can be done with water, a little bit of fertilizer, and a lot of heat. So it was awesome. Okay, I have one slide about teaching that Andrea sent me, and actually Dean shared. Yeah, he shared actually, this is the only thing I really wanted to mention, is the cover crops and ecosystems class, which Dean talked about quite a bit earlier today, so we can go on. This is also a slide I got from Andrea, and I have also referenced this quite a bit, so we're gonna move into something a little bit more, I think, difficult to talk about. So several new reports that are coming out from Flatwater Press in Nebraska. They have a whole series of looking at nitrate in rural drinking water. And this was a really hard thing for me to read. It came out, I think it was in a Sunday morning paper, and I'm reading this, I'm like, oh. So there's a correlation between nitrate in rural drinking water and brain cancer in children. And Nebraska is pretty high on the list of states there. So this obviously created a lot of discussion in our state. Some of it, kind of heated. It's a tough subject to tackle, but we know we have a nitrate problem in Nebraska, and I think that's what motivates a lot of our work. Okay, my last part is going to be about extension. This is my extension colleagues. So those are all the water and cropping systems extension educators, many of which work with cover crops and on-farm studies, or at least, get questions about cover crops and things like that. I also should mention that a lot of our colleagues on the beef side or livestock side are also working with cover crops. I wasn't able to include any of that here, but we know forages are important. Okay, so these are some of the things that happened in 2022. We've had several field days where we showed some of our biochar and cover crop plots, some of our variety trial results. We worked with, across the state, and this is just a sampling of field days. We have a presence at Husker Harvest Days, which is a huge farm expo in the Midwest. One of my colleagues, Todd Whitney, actually has some projects with schools and soil health. We've had several conferences. Lastly, I wanted to mention 2 on-farm studies, or really extension-led studies. One of them is by my colleague Katie Perrick, water quality extension educator. And she has this is a collaboration between UNL Extension, the Nebraska Department of Energy, and the Environment and Natural Resource District. So we were actually able to purchase this high boy interseeder And this was also 2022 was the first year of the study. We had 29 farmers sign up and over 3,000 acres planted with this inner cedar. So she can do the math, about 100 acres per farm were planted. This was a demo project. We did collect a little bit of data, but basically we're in a phase where we're really trying to, I guess, show farmers this is an opportunity to, we know we have to plant cover crops, before harvest, really ideally. So this was an opportunity for people to get their cover crops established. And much of that was actually irrigated systems. So, and then another project that I think is super interesting, Jenny Reese, an extension educator in central Nebraska, is leading this. She has a lot of farmers that she works with that are very innovative and experimenting with early season interseeding. I think this is the second or third year that she has done that. Lots of cool stuff coming out of that. Lastly, one research that I wanted to share, this was actually coming out of some work that Andrea and I and some of our colleagues in computer engineering have done. So there's we developed a little cover crop calculator. I put the website up there, but I realized it's kind of cut off there, but you can find it. And so you can, so this is for Nebraska, you can click on your county, then put in your planting date, termination date, click simulate, and it'll give you a graph of the cover crop biomass that you can expect, water uptake and nitrogen uptake. So it's been several years in the making and we're pretty excited to have launched that this year. We're hoping with some of these variety trials that we are carrying out that will produce additional data. So right now we can only simulate that for rye, but with the new data, we're hoping to add more species. Okay, I know we don't have time for questions, but I did want to make sure that if you're interested in any of the on-farm studies, all the on-farm research reports for each year of each study can be found on our on-farm research website. We also regularly publish on our crop watch website, sorry. And yeah, I'm shamelessly advertising for our soil health conference that's coming up. So it's coming up February 9th. It's at the Eastern Nebraska Research Extension Education Center, which is about 40 minutes north of Lincoln. So you can follow that QR code and register. It's a free conference. Okay, I think that was all that I have. Okay.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Alison Robertson, and I'm a plant pathologist at Iowa State University. I don't know, maybe 8 years ago, Tom Casper, many of you will know, dragged me into cover crops. And now it's very hard to get me out of cover crops. So anyway, Mark Licht normally gives the report from Iowa, but he asked me to do it today. And then I was a little concerned because it's a lot of plant pathology stuff, but I guess that's what you get when you ask a plant pathologist. So the first, what am I clicking? Use them. Okay, so some folks have already presented some of the work that we're doing in the precision sustainable agricultural agriculture project. So I am involved in the Common Experiment 2. And as part of that experiment, we're looking at cover crop termination timing on slugs, insect pests, diseases, of course, weeds and corn performance. And this gives you an overall map of where we're doing the Common Experiment 2. So you can see we have that all the way from Texas and Florida, all the way up to Wisconsin and Vermont. But one of the things that that my lab has taken the lead on is just looking at the effect of cover crop termination timing on seedling disease. And so this is just a very quick overview. You can see that we have a no rye treatment in there. Then we have the early termination treatment, which is more than 14 days before planting, a late termination treatment, which is 0 to 7 days after planting. Late termination, which is 3 to 7 days before planting, and then the planting green, which is 0 to 7 days after. And you can see that generally across those locations, we tend to see more seedling disease when we plant green. And Rochelle, who is a research scientist in my lab, has a poster here, and I think it's poster number 24, so it goes into a little bit more detail on the seedling disease. But what I wanted, obviously one of the things we look at is yield, and so when you look across those locations, we'll see that at, I think it was 7 of the locations that the planting green yielded less than that early termination, so terminating the cover crop about 2 weeks or more before planting. But in another 7 of those locations, we had equivalent yield, and then at 2 of the locations, we actually got greater yield when we planted green. So this is just the first year of the data, 2021. 2023 will be our 3rd year of doing this project, and so we're just summarizing the 22 data now, and I'm really looking forward to seeing all the effects of termination timing on pest management. Another thing that Mark actually asked me to talk about was socially distancing cereal rye from corn, or precision planting. We like to call it social distance, and that's because I was with a practical farmer of Iowa farmer, and he said, "Oh, it's social distancing," and I was like, "Yeah." So this study was recently published, but it was done by a master's student in my lab. We had funding from the Iowa Nutrient Research Center and the North Central SARE. And so what we had in this was we had no cover crop, obviously, and then we also broadcasted the cover crop. We were using cereal rye. We use cereal rye in all our research because it gives us disease. And and then we also had, we drilled the cereal rye, so we blocked one of the drills, and then so we just planted 3 rows of cereal rye in between the corn rows. And then we also blocked 3 drills, so then we just planted cereal rye kind of like on 30-inch rows, right, in the middle of the corn. And basically what we found is that as we increase the distance between the winter rye residue and the corn, that we reduce seedling disease, and we reduce the amount of pythium that we found in those corn seedlings. We saw increased shoot dry weight and plant height, and we were also able to mitigate the yield drag. So one of the things about this research, though, and this is where we're continuing it, is that there's some shortfalls, right, that we didn't address as plant pathologists. So if we're plugging 3 of the drills and only planting 1 row of rye into the trials, we have, this is actually the wrong way around. So if we're plugging 1 drill, we're planting 25% less cover. If we're plugging 3 drills, we have 75% less cover on the landscape, right? And so what does that mean for soil erosion? What does that mean for soil health? And what does that mean for nutrient recycling? And so we are now working with Peter O'Brien, and we got some funding from the Iowa Nutrient Research Center. And so as we're going to start a project this year where we're actually combining planting green with socially distanced. So the thing is that the reason why farmers want to plant green is because you can't get in early enough, right, before the corn to kill your, to terminate your cereal rye. But what if we could socially distance the cereal rye and then plant green? So get in there and plant our corn and terminate the cereal rye on the same day. So would that, what would that do in terms of seedling disease and in terms of yield drag? But then also, how would that contribute to all the the beneficial environmental effects that we're supposed to be getting from those cover crops? This is some other work that's been going on in my lab. I feel like this is all my lab, sorry. But we've been looking at allelochemicals related to the cereal rye. And so I had a research scientist with me who's now left and gone to North Carolina State University. But what she was looking at was allelochemicals and pythium. And so we found that when we collected root exudates and allelochemicals from the cereal rye, in the presence of the pythium, we got more severe seedling disease. And so we know that cereal rye varieties will produce different amount of allelochemicals, right? And so the idea behind this is, can we come up with varieties of rye that a farmer should plant before corn because they produce less allelochemicals? And so this is just some work that we just finished up. We just submitted it, but just showing that there are differences in the amount of root rot severity that we get between these different varieties. And this was just a study in cups in the greenhouse. And so hopefully we can take this out to the field and see if it holds true in the field. This next project that I want to talk about is one that we're doing with, so Mark Lecter's involved and Marshall McDaniel and also Peter O'Brien from USDA ARS. But we're looking at cover crop spatial distribution on the landscape, along with nitrogen and then also disease. If you work with me, you have to do disease, right, Mark? So really, like behind all of our research, Mark and Marshall and Peter and I have been doing a lot of research. We're trying to understand what's causing the yield drag in the cereal rye corn system. And so in this project that started last year, we're in the second year now, we have cereal rye and no cereal rye, and then we have different rates of, I'm actually going to go to the next slide because that'll give us our, so we have 3 landscapes in Ames, then we have the cereal rye planted in the previous fall, we have corn planted on the main plots of cereal rye and no cereal rye, and then we have 6 nitrogen rates in there as well. So just looking at the nitrogen that we need in the system. And then what my lab's particularly interested in is the seedling disease. And so we're collecting seedlings from the 0, 60, 120 and 300 pounds per acre plots, just to see if that nitrogen at planting, whether that can mitigate some of the seedling disease, because the idea here is that if the corn is competing with the microbes that are immobilizing the nitrogen, that it's more susceptible to seedling disease. And so that's what we're trying to have a look at there. This is some preliminary data from Mila, who's a PhD student working in Mark's lab, and she's been working in collaboration with Rochelle. But the first graph on the left, on your left, just shows seedling disease versus plant height. First of all, you can see that landscape doesn't seem to have much of an effect on the plant height or the seedling disease, but you will notice that plant height as seedling disease increases, plant height tends to be a little bit shorter. So what we've noticed in our work is that when you get Pythium or seedling disease that's just chronic, it'll reduce the vigor of those seedlings, and so there'll be a growth stage or two behind their neighbors. And so I think that's what's maybe happening in this plant height, is that where we have more seedling disease, those plants may be a growth stage or two between. And then the next one, we have seedling disease versus nitrogen rate. And so as I look at that data, once again, there doesn't really seem to be an effective landscape. And from the data as well, it's a little bit hard to see if there's anything going on there with nitrogen rate and seedling disease. So hopefully once Mila and Rochelle get to look at that a little bit better, we'll get some more information from there. So I beat Eileen. And as I was sitting here listening to all the research going on, I know that there's a ton of cover crop research going on at Iowa State that we didn't even touch on, Mark. So, but anyway, at least that gives you a glimpse of some of the stuff that we're doing related to plant pathology, which is probably the furthest thing from a lot of your minds. So thank you for having me, and I'll be around. So thanks.
The space bar or the perfect. Okay. Yes. I don't think
Hi everyone, my name is Bethany Bedeker. I am the new face here. This is my first year here. Usually Charles Ellis is up here talking with you, and he thought maybe you would like to have a different face and change it up a little bit. Also, as you might be able to tell from my title, we're going to be a little less focused on maybe the research going on in Missouri, and thought it would be interesting to maybe focus on some of the cover crop efforts that we're doing where I work, which is the University of Missouri Center for Regenerative Agriculture. And my role there is as a cover crop education specialist, and I was just hired in May. So I thought maybe we would highlight some of the things that we're doing at the center related to cover crops. And to kind of give a little bit of a background, let's see here, there we go. I thought I would highlight how much things seem to be progressing pretty quickly for the center. Just a couple years ago, they announced the creation of the center with Rob Myers as being our director of that. That summer, hired Kelly Wilson as our assistant director, launched a website in the fall, and then by the spring of this year, we'd hired our first, what I'll call maybe like a specialty role, which is my role as a cover crop education specialist, which I think speaks pretty well to the things going on at the center, that would be the first role that is filled. And then with that, again, with how fast things seem to be progressing, we got a pretty substantial grant just this fall, and with that, we will be hiring several more staff in the upcoming year. And then that's a little picture of our team right there. But just about a year ago, at the center, we hosted a Missouri State Conference on cover crops and soil health, and that brought in about 500 registrants. A few, and more like 300 maybe attended that meeting, and we assume the rest kind of watched those recordings. But that was a great thing that we offered pretty early on. With that, we developed some farmer videos, just kind of interviewing farmers throughout the state on what are you doing with cover crops and what have been your experiences. And it really seems like the videos are a very popular format for people who are interested in learning about this sort of thing. And a way that we definitely look at doing more things in the future is adding some more video format outreach sorts of things in the future. We also have, we've talked a lot about partnerships today. There are a lot of really great partnerships that we have in Missouri. And so this is a field day that we put on earlier in March of last year with the Missouri Corn and Soybean Associations. And once again, we will be doing kind of a similar thing, partnering with the Soybean Association to have a cover crop demonstration out at their research farm. And it's really nice that they're all also interested in cover crops and getting their folks interested in that. Similarly, with those same folks, as well as MFA, which is the primary ag retailer, again, really nice that these sorts of groups are interested in cover crops and these sort of topics like pollinators and cover crops. We had this field day in June of last year. And the Department of Conservation is another one that kind of has jumped on board as well. And so in July, we held a series of weekly webinars about cover crops. And something that was really interesting with that is the reason that we decided to do this for the Missouri Department of Conservation is they announced about a year ago that on all of the farmland owned and managed by the department, they would start having cover crops be the standard practice on that land, with the additional goal of eventually having diverse cover crop mixes being used on 75% of that acreage. And that's about 65,000 acres in the state that they own. And so that was a really neat initiative by the Department of Conservation to kind of start bringing cover crops more widespread throughout the state. Another thing that we did was in July, we held a series of cover crop workshops, which was just a single day program in 4 different regions of the state. And I think that brought it at least around 50 people to each one. And we had some really great conversations, some expert farmer panelists, and had a lot of Q&A discussion around that. And these are just some images from those trainings. And so we had we had the regional soil health specialists that have these really great trailers with the rainfall simulators, and people always are really responsive to the visual demonstration of the rainfall simulators. And so we had those, as well as, like I said, the presentations and farmer panels. Then kind of looking ahead to the future, I know we're all familiar with a lot of the resources that are available, obviously with the Midwest Cover Crop Council. And there are these training modules that were developed with the council and also the University of Missouri. And one of the things that I'll be doing in my role in the next year or so is working with the other regional cover crop councils to kind of develop these trainings for to fit well in other regions as well. As well as we were one of the many folks who got one of the USDA Climate Smart Commodities projects. And so ours is specific actually to the state of Missouri. And so we're referring to it as the Missouri Circle Project, which is climate resilient crop and livestock systems. And about half of that funding pool will be going to incentive payments related to cover crops, which we really hope is going to be a great way to get started on getting a lot more of our acreage in Missouri looking green at this time of year. Another one of those grants that came out as part of the Climate Smart Ag is the Farmers for Soil Health, which is a 20-state span, so a little bit bigger than our region, Missouri. But we are listed as one of the partners for that project, and we'll be specifically handling the cover crop training and education in conjunction with their project. Some other things is we recently found out we've got some funding for a cover crop variety project, and so that will be some pretty interesting things coming out of that in the next few years. As well as some general development of educational resources, videos, and publications as usual. And then the last thing that I wanted to highlight, which was really kind of interesting and fun, that this happened at the end of December, largely due to the timely efforts of our director, but cover crops were featured on the front page of USA Today. And so it's just really cool to see the public taking greater interest in these things, and we hope to continue to be able to contribute to that moving forward. So that was a very, very quick update from me, and thank you very much.
As I trip over the words. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for sticking out the day. I am Ashley Waggoner. I'm a postdoc in the Department of Soil Science at the University of Wisconsin in Madison with Matt Ruark, who is usually the one standing up here giving this presentation. So today I'm going to be talking about some of the research I've been working with, which is some on-farm nitrogen and cover crop research. Generally, the research questions that are being asked is how much nitrogen should be applied to get that economic optimal yield, and how do cover crops affect the amount of nitrogen needed? Many people before me have talked about this already today. Some background: previously in 2014, 15, 15, 16, and 16, 17, there were some studies that were done at 3 of our research stations in Wisconsin, the Arlington, Lancaster, and Marshfield research stations, which I'll show you on a map on the next slide. And during that study, they looked at 3 different cover crops, so annual ryegrass, spring barley, and winter rye, which terminated at different times, either winter termination, sometimes lasting in the winter, sometimes not, and then always having to be terminated in the spring. So this background, these cover crops were planted into fields that had received fall manure application as well. So this research has been taken on farm. So this is the map of Wisconsin. These blue dots are where our agricultural research stations are. By taking this research on farm, we're now conducting a 3-year study, 2 of which we've completed. In the Manitoba, Walworth, and Green Lake counties, which are represented by these red dots or red stars. And in these locations, we're now just doing cover versus no cover. The producers get some say in what cover they decide to plant. And then once that cover has been terminated and the corn has been planted, we come in and apply a nitrogen rate study over that with 8 nitrogen rates. By moving the research on farm, we're able to add some diversity to our results. We're able to get more of the how do differences in soil and nutrient availability impact these results, differences in weather just from being in different parts of the state. Management, occasionally we have a site that has no manure, or often in Wisconsin we do have manure applications because we have lots of cows. Most of our cover crop is just the single species winter rye or cereal rye, but we have had one site that has used a spring barley and winter wheat mix. We also, by moving it online, allow the producer to manage the timing, and they're using their own equipment, and so we're not always having the exact same thing happening over and over again. So with the results from both the on-farm trials and from the research stations, I've been calculating the differences between the cover and no cover. This is an example of a graph from the research station. Along the bottom is our nitrogen rate, along the y-axis is the yield. The red bar across the top is our no cover treatment, which ended up in this case being non-responsive to that additional nitrogen. In the blue is the winter rye. And we can see that by adding that extra nitrogen, we were able to get a response. So we had the 0 pounds of nitrogen per acre for our no cover crop. However, we have the 120 pounds of nitrogen per acre that was required to find our optimal nitrogen rate, or to reach our optimum yield in the winter rye, leading to a difference in 120 pounds of nitrogen per acre. So when I have a positive delta on the following graph for the EONR, means that there's more nitrogen needed than the no cover. We can do the same thing for the yield, except that when there's a negative delta, it means that there's
a lower yield than the no cover. So in this case, we found that even with our optimum nitrogen rate, we received a lower yield by about 2,000 bushels per acre. All right, so this is the results from the research stations. This along the bottom is the biomass. So we're comparing these changes in economic optimum nitrogen rates or our yield with our biomass that's been produced. And you can see that we have a pretty good relationship between increasing biomass resulting in the increasing need for nitrogen, and actually it seems that anything over 550 pounds of dry matter in our biomass is where we see that we're going to have to increase our nitrogen rate. I want to point out it's not on this graph, but the rates out here towards the back are our winter rye points. So we had a lot more biomass in our winter rye than we did in some of our spring barley and annual ryegrass. Of course, that also generally had to be terminated later. So that makes a lot of sense. But we were getting in our winter rye between 2,000, 3,000 pounds of dry matter per acre. In opposition, we also saw that as you increase biomass, you tend to decrease the amount of yield that you're going to receive. Again, those points at towards your right are going to be those winter rye points. So a couple of examples of some of the results we've seen from this on-farm study. One is our 2021 result from Green Lake. So on the left, we have our no cover, on the right is our cover treatments. We just have our nitrogen rates along the x-axis and our yield along the y. In our no cover, we had what was deemed non-responsive, so we didn't need to add any additional nitrogen to reach our economic optimum nitrogen rate, and we saw the optimum yield of 186 bushels per acre. However, when we added the cover, we did see that we had to add about 170 pounds of nitrogen, but we still maintained the yield. So we weren't seeing that difference in yield that we saw at our research stations. Also, at this site, we only had 560 pounds of dry matter per acre. So that need for additional nitrogen still follows our graph of needing more nitrogen as biomass increase, but we didn't necessarily see that yield drag that we would have expected from our research station results. In another case in Walworth County in 2021, we got some very variable results. Both of these graphs are fit with a quadratic curve. Neither one plateaued the way we would have expected. Couldn't really fit that to the model. Had to start digging in a little bit deeper to find out what happened at this site. Turned out this site actually experienced a lot of drought that year, whereas Green Lake didn't. And so just by adding these extra sites and this other conditions, we're able to get more variable results than we were seeing at our research stations. And so just a couple of conclusions that we've kind of come up to. There's still a lot of analysis to be done on this. We still have a whole another year of the results to gather, but our on-farm locations are not producing the large amounts of biomass that we saw at our agricultural research stations. They were still planting in similar time periods and terminating in similar time periods, but we're not seeing that same amount of biomass. The nitrogen effect is generally holding true. As you increase that biomass, you are having to increase the amount of nitrogen being applied after the cover crop is terminated. However, we're not seeing that yield decrease so much as we do at the research stations. And so that's something that we'll be able to explore a little bit more as well. With that, I will shut it down and let you guys get up and go look at some posters. Thank you.
All right, thank you, everyone. With that, that's the conclusion of our program for today. We will have the poster session until 6:30 out in this hallway, and it goes all along from Amphitheater 1 down through the east lobby. So please check out the posters. If you'd like to go to dinner, which will be on your own, we will meet at 7 in the hotel lobby. And we'll be taking the shuttle and maybe doing some carpooling depending on how many people plan to come. And then tomorrow morning, we will be back in this room at 8:30 for partner reports. So thanks everyone for coming.